Welcome to the complete course for the Itil 4 Foundation Certification Exam. In this course, you're going to learn everything you need to know to take and pass the Itil 4 Foundation Exam on your first attempt. In addition to that, you're going to be exposed to the entire Itil 4 framework, so you can learn how to best use it within your organization. So whether you're taking this course to learn about the Itil 4 framework, or you're taking this course to prepare for the certification exam so you can get a new job or advancing your current organization, this course has been designed specifically to teach you everything covered in the official Itil Foundation textbook, and it's designed as a complete textbook replacement. Now, before we dive into the course materials, let me provide you with a quick introduction to Itil. If your boss enrolled you in this course, you may not even know what Itil is all about or what it's used for. Well, Itil is a framework for service management, but I guess that begs the question, what exactly is service management? Well, service management is a set of specialized organizational capabilities for enabling value to customers in the form of services. We're going to talk a lot about service management throughout this entire course. In fact, the entirety of Section 2 is dedicated to the topic of service management. Now, Itil was designed to provide organizations with a comprehensive framework for IT service management. In fact, Itil is the most popular and widely used information technology service management framework in the entire world. It's one of the reasons that Itil Foundation has such a high demand, because most large companies have built their IT service management systems and processes around the idea and concepts of the Itil framework. Now, I know I've gotten you excited about Itil, hopefully, and I need to take just a small detour in the course to introduce myself and share with you 4 important tips to help you learn better during our time together. Now, first, my name is Jason Dion, and I'm the lead instructor here at Dion Training Solutions. I've been working in the IT and cybersecurity field for over 2 decades for organizations both large and small. In all of these organizations, though, there's been one common thread, and that's Itil. Now, when I'm talking about small organizations, I'm talking about companies with less than 20 people, small companies like my own. When I talk about large organizations, I'm thinking about some of my previous positions. My last one in particular, I was with an organization that spanned 6 continents, dozens of countries, and millions of end users. And guess what? All of these organizations, they ran on Itil. So I'm not just an instructor, I'm also a practitioner of Itil, and I've been using it for decades. Now, rest assured, you are in great hands with us. In fact, I'm an authorized instructor for Itil, and my company is an accredited training organization for PeopleCert on behalf of Excellos, the creators of the Itil framework and the certification exams. In fact, because we're an ATO, all of our courses are reviewed by Excellos prior to us releasing them to you, and this ensures that you're getting the quality training required to pass the exam. Every video in this course has the ability for you to turn on closed captioning. Each video is captioned by a real live human and checked for accuracy. This allows you to read along with the course if you need to. Many of my students who speak English as their second language really love having those captions playing along with the videos, and this helps them aid in their learning and understanding. Now, if you want to enable closed captions, simply click on the CC button in the bottom of the video player. We have a student support group with several thousand other students who are learning Itil and other IT and project management certifications through all of our courses. If you want to join the fun there, you can find us at facebook.com/groups/DionTraining, and you can request to join our private group. There's no extra cost to you by joining this group, and it's there to help you. In this group, we answer questions, put out additional free content, and help support each other through our IT careers. So if you want to ask a question there, all you have to do is post it, and you're likely to get an answer within just a few minutes, because most of the time there are thousands of other students, both past and present, who join the conversations there. So if you're on Facebook, I highly recommend joining the group today. This course comes with a downloadable study guide as a complete resource for you. You can download this PDF, and it's attached to this lesson. To access it, simply download it from the resources in this lesson, and then you can print it out and refer to it during your offline studies and as you go through the rest of this course. Let's discuss a few details about the Itil 4 Foundation exam. If you're like most of my students, you're probably taking this course because you want to become Itil 4 Foundation certified. Maybe you're working towards this certification to advance in your current career, or maybe it's because you're trying to get your first job in the information technology field. Either way, this course is designed to help teach you everything you need to know in order to pass that exam. To help you focus your studies throughout the course, though, it's important for you to understand how the exam is designed. The questions on the Itil 4 exam are focused on you having the ability to recall or understand the concepts from this course. Now, the words recall and understand are the key words here. If a question is focused on your ability to recall something, This means you have to be able to identify a definition or a term from the answer choices provided. For example, if the exam provides you with a definition for a particular term that we use in the course, it's going to provide it to you word for word the same way we presented it inside the course. And then you're going to be provided with 4 different terms, and you have to select the appropriate term that matches the definition given. Now, this is a great example of a question using the recall level of difficulty. On the exam, you're going to get 9 questions that are considered recall questions. For that reason, it's really important to be familiar with the definitions that we present in this course. All of these definitions are provided to you in the downloadable study guide, and they're going to be displayed on the screen whenever I'm teaching them to you. Now, if a question is focused on your ability to understand something, this means you have to be able to describe or explain a definition, a term, or a concept based on the answers provided. For these questions, the exam isn't looking for an exact word match. Instead, you might get an example of something and you have to determine the correct idle practice or term that relates to it. If you pay close attention in this course, you're going to learn the concepts of Itil 4 and be able to answer those questions on the exam without too much difficulty. Now, how do you take the official certification exam and become Itil 4 Foundation certified? Well, Excelos and PeopleCert make it quite easy because you don't even have to get in your car and drive to a testing center like many other certification exams. Instead, you're able to take the exam online from the comfort of your own home or office using the PeopleCert web proctoring service. To schedule your exam, you do need an exam voucher though, because this covers the cost of the certification exam itself. You can buy the exam voucher directly from PeopleCert on their website at a cost of $349, or you can go to diontraining.com and purchase your exam voucher at a special discounted rate of $299 that's available just for my students. Because we're an authorized training organization for Itil 4 foundations, we're able to buy these vouchers in bulk and we pass the savings on to our students. Now, once you order, your voucher is delivered to your email within about 10 minutes, and you can then schedule your certification exam for the day and time that's most convenient for you. So now that you know what to study in terms of recall and understanding, and you know where to buy your voucher and how to schedule your exam, what's next? Well, let's talk about the exam itself. There's some key facts and figures that you need to know. First, the exam is timed. You're going to get 60 minutes to take the exam. Now, if you're not a native English speaker, but you're taking the exam in English, you can go ahead and get an extra 15 minutes of time on the exam if you request it during your scheduling. This will bring your time up to 75 minutes if you request the time extension from PeopleCert. Now, for all of us English speakers though, we only get 60 minutes. Don't worry though, 60 minutes is plenty of time for this exam. Most of my students finish in about 30 minutes. Now, as for the questions, the exam only has 40 questions, and the exam contains only multiple choice questions on the exam. So again, this exam is about recalling and understanding, not memorization and not comprehension in depth. So you won't have to write out a definition word for word or pull up an answer out of thin air. Instead, it's always an A, B, C, or D choice. To pass the certification, you have to answer at least 26 questions out of 40 correctly. This equates to a 65% or higher on the exam for you to pass it and earn your Itil 4 certification. To best prepare for the exam, I recommend you take a lot of practice exams. We've included quiz questions and 2 full-length practice exams with this course. When you're taking a practice exam, I recommend aiming for 75% or higher to consider it a pass, because this will give you at least a 10% buffer in case you end up having a bad test day or you get nervous when taking a timed test or certification exam. Now, this is because every time you take the exam, you have to buy a new voucher, and you only want to have to take it once. Now, I've said you're going to get 40 questions on exam day, and they're all multiple choice, but they are made up of 3 different types of multiple choice questions. We call these classic, missing word, and list. Let's take a look at each of these. First, we have a classic question. For example, which character was created by Walt Disney? A, Bart Simpson, B, Mickey Mouse, C, Fred Flintstone, or D, Garfield? Well, if you know cartoons, you probably know the answer is B, Mickey Mouse. Now, you may see a few classic questions on the exam that are shown as what we call a negative classic question. This is symbolized by the word not in the question. So if you're asked something like, which of these is not a car brand? A, Ford, B, Saturn, C, Cisco, or D, Toyota, you hopefully realize that Cisco is not a car brand, but instead is networking gear. In fact, Cisco is a very popular brand of networking equipment, but the other 3 are car brands. So we would say Cisco is the right answer in this case. The next type of question is what we call a missing word question. On the exam, this is shown by a question mark that would represent a single word or a short phrase of 2, 3, or 4 words. For example, A or and blank is a type of fruit. Is it A, apple, B, carrot, C, onion, or D, celery? Well, the answer is A, apple, because B, C, and D are all types of vegetables. This makes the sentence read as, an apple is a type of fruit. Our final type of question is what's known as a list question. You're probably going to only see one or two of these on your Itil 4 foundation exam though. These questions ask it so that more than one correct answer can be provided. So you're going to get a numbered list and you'll have to choose the right answer that represents two of the correct list items. For example, which ingredients are in a PB&J sandwich? 1, peanut butter, 2, apples, 3, bacon, or 4, grape jelly? Well, as a parent who made a lot of PB&J sandwiches in my life, I can tell you that the answer is 1, peanut butter, and 4, jelly. So we have to find the letter that corresponds with answers 1 and 4 in it, which in this case is D, and that becomes our answer choice. So now that you know all about the exam, I hope you're ready to start learning all about Itil 4. Let's get started. Back when you attended school as a child, you may have learned about the Industrial Revolution. The first Industrial Revolution occurred in the 18th and 19th centuries all across Europe and America. During this period, humanity moved from an agrarian-based rural society of farmers into an urbanized industrial area that later developed into some of our country's largest cities. This movement was brought about by the development of mechanization in the form of iron and textile industries, as well as the power of the steam engine for our transportation needs. The Industrial Revolution was only the first one, though. By the end of the 19th century and continuing until World War I, or the Great War as it's known in Europe, humanity moved into the Second Industrial Revolution. During this time, our industries expanded to include steel, oil, electricity, and electrically powered equipment to aid in the mass production of goods. During this time period, cars were developed with their internal combustion engines that made transportation even more convenient and efficient. At the same time, the light bulb began to replace candlelight, allowing us to work longer into the night. And of course, communication across great distances became possible through the use of our telephones. Life was better than it had ever been before, but humanity wasn't done exploring and inventing yet. Technology continued to expand in its use, but there weren't any real major breakthroughs until the end of the 20th century. It was around 1980, and technology had jumped to yet another level. This was way beyond what existed in the Second Industrial Revolution. It was at this time that the Third Industrial Revolution, known as the Digital Revolution, truly began. With the advancement of analog and digital electronics, humanity began to utilize life-changing technologies on a daily basis, including the personal computer, the internet, and the entire spectrum of information and communication technologies. Many of these things are the things you're responsible for within your organization, and it was during this Third Industrial Revolution that Itil was first created. Itil was originally developed as a series of best practices and guidance on how to run an information technology organization. In fact, Itil, as it was originally developed, was an acronym that stood for Information Technology Infrastructure Library. Itil began in the 1980s as a way for organizations to create processes and procedures to better run their IT systems. Throughout the last 3 decades, Itil became the de facto standard around the world for IT service management. As we moved as a society from the First Industrial Revolution to the Second and then on to the Third, we're now at a crossroads again. Now we're moving into the Fourth Industrial Revolution, and it is happening right now. The Fourth Industrial Revolution is marked by the creation of cyber-physical systems, where a fusion of technologies has blurred the lines between physical and digital realms. This includes the use of technologies like robotics, nanotechnology, artificial intelligence, the Internet of Things, autonomous cars, and so much more. This explosive growth in technology in the early 21st century has transformed our world economies as well as ourselves. So you may be wondering right now, why are we spending time talking about the history of various industrial revolutions that occurred over the past few hundred years? Well, it's to make this point. Itil 4 is not considered ITIL version 4. Instead, it's Itil for the Fourth Industrial Revolution. Itil is no longer considered an acronym. Itil is a brand name. It simply means Itil. It doesn't mean Information Technology Infrastructure Library anymore, because Itil is more than just infrastructure. This is a major shift in the way Itil approaches the challenges of IT service management based on this as well. In today's digital economy, every organization in the world has become a service organization. You may think your organization isn't a service organization, but when you really look at what it does on a daily basis, it truly is a service organization. For example, You may work for a grocery store, and you may think you're in the business of selling milk and cereal, which are both products. But in reality, you're probably really a service organization too. Most of the services, if not all of the services that your company currently owns and manages, is done to co-create value with your customers. And these are enabled by information technology. Now, how can I make this claim? Well, let's consider the large retailer like Walmart, who sells a wide variety of different products from diapers to groceries to electronics and car tires. Walmart has been wildly successful in selling all of these different products, but the particular products Walmart sells doesn't really matter that much. Instead, the real reason that Walmart has been so successful is that they're able to provide a service to their customers that no one else has been able to do the way they have. And that is a collection of services that's enabled by IT. Walmart, for example, has created a wonderfully robust distribution and logistics system to get their products to their stores quickly, efficiently, and more cost-effectively than other people. And this allows them to rely on complex inventory tracking and logistics systems that are all run by various IT components and services. They've been able to do this to provide products at their everyday low price, which is actually the service they provide to their customers. Walmart's service is bringing you the products you want or need at the lowest price, always. Other stores can't bring that to you at the same level or at the same cost that Walmart can. So in a price battle, Walmart is going to win every time because of their ability to embrace IT to enable their services. But how is Walmart co-creating value with me, the customer? Well, let's say I was having a party tonight and I invited you over for dinner. I might run over to Walmart to buy all of the supplies I need, things like meat and cheeses, vegetables and drinks, and I bring them all back to my kitchen. I then use all of those ingredients to cook a meal for my party tonight. The value isn't the ingredients that I got from Walmart. It's the outcome that I had when I co-created value with Walmart. Walmart provided all the ingredients at a low price, and I provided the ability to cook it all up into a delicious meal. Now, the value is the happiness and the full bellies of all of my guests at my party. This is the value co-created through the service. Now, as you think about all the different industries and organizations in the world, it's really hard to think of any that aren't providing some kind of service that is enabled by technology. Because of this, technology has become commonplace in the modern workplace. But all of this technology needs to be managed in order for it to be effective at enabling value to your customers by providing services. And this brings us to the concept of service management. Service management is defined as a set of specialized organizational capabilities for enabling value to customers in the form of services. The purpose of Itil 4 is to provide organizations working in this modern service economy with guidance for managing their information technology and information technology dependencies effectively, efficiently, and in some coordinated, structured, and integrated way that combines the agility, the time to market, and their ability to deliver new things faster while using their risk controls and providing assurance that the services will be performed properly today, tomorrow, and any day further off into the future. Notice this isn't just about providing a service fast to a customer, but it's also about being able to balance that with the proper controls so that that is providing a quality service now and into the future. This ensures that there's a balance of speed and control within our organizations and their services. Simply put, Itil 4 provides organizations with a comprehensive framework for IT service management. This framework is designed to ensure that an effective, efficient, flexible, coordinated, and integrated system for the governance and management of services is established. It also is concerned with ensuring that these services are continually improving within your organization. Now, if you're new to the business world or information technology, the word governance might be one that you're not quite familiar with. Governance is simply the means by which an organization is directed and controlled. This means that it involves all of the processes needed to govern or oversee the running of the organization. For example, in the United States, our government creates rules and laws that are used as a method to direct the actions of its citizens. This is called governance, right? It's the way that we operate a country. Well, organizations need governance too. And at your company, there's a process probably for everything you need to do. Think about it if you wanted to take 2 weeks of vacation. You couldn't simply decide just to not go to work for 2 weeks without telling your boss, right? You'd probably end up losing your job. Now instead, you're going to go through the process to request the vacation, and that process is going to be different based on your organization or my organization, because each organization runs itself and its processes differently. That way that they run things, that's known as governance. As I stated in the last section of this course, Itil is a framework for information technology service management, known as ITSM. According to Itil 4, service management is defined as a set of specialized organizational capabilities for enabling value to customers in the form of services. Whenever we speak about an organizational capability, such as in this definition of service management, this is referring to an organization having both the capacity and the ability to perform the functions required. Service management, whether you're performing it using Itil 4 as its framework or another ITSM framework, is focused on how to best create value within an organization to provide the desired benefits to your consumers. Now, to do that, an organization must organize its people to best support the organization's activities, practices, and processes. These activities, practices, and processes are the engine that drive the creation of the organization's products and their services. But none of these activities, practices, and processes could be done in isolation. Instead, we have to consider the service relationships that are built, created, and nurtured throughout the service management process. In this section of the course, we're going to discuss these generalized concepts of service management that apply to both Itil 4 and other frameworks. Then, we're going to spend a bit of time going over the concepts of outcomes, risks, utility, and warranty to help build a solid foundation before we move into the specific Itil 4 concepts that are covered throughout the rest of this course. Now remember, even though the concepts in this section are generalized for IT service management, that doesn't mean they won't be on the Itil 4 exam. In fact, we're going to cover all three parts of Learning Objective 1 in this section of the course. This includes Learning Objective 1.1, which states that you're going to have to be able to recall the definition of service, utility, warranty, customer, user, service management, and sponsor. You can also expect to get 2 questions from this learning objective on your certification exam. Under Learning Objective 1.2, you're going to be required to describe the concepts of cost, value, organization, outcome, risk, utility, and warranty. On your exam, 2 questions will come from this particular learning objective as well. Finally, we're going to cover Learning Objective 1.3, which requires you to be able to describe the key concepts of service relationships, including service offerings, service relationship management, service provision, and service consumption. On the certification exam, you can expect to receive 1 question from this particular learning objective. So let's get started learning about service management and its key concepts. What is value? Well, in Itil 4, value is the perceived benefits, usefulness, and importance of something. Now, I know this is very generic, but let's dig into this short definition and explore it a bit, because value is an extremely important concept inside of Itil and service management in general. First, notice in the definition that value is perceived. This means that the amount of value something has is always subjective. Who gets to determine this perceived amount of value? Well, the privilege is reserved for the recipient of the value. So let me give you an example to help clarify it. There's 2 roommates, Julia and John. One afternoon, they both decide they want to go get an orange. They walk over to the refrigerator to each get themselves an orange and find that there's only one left in the fruit drawer. They begin to fight with each other because each person really wants that orange for themselves. Julia says she values the orange more and she should have it. But John quickly retorts that he values the orange more and that he should have it. Neither person explains to the other why they want the orange, and instead they don't tell them about the value they perceive that it has. But being omniscient as the narrator in this example, I know exactly what each of them wants to do with that orange. Julia's hungry, and she desired to have a sweet and healthy afternoon snack. So if she gets the orange, she plans to cut it apart, eat the sweet, juicy flesh inside of it, and throw away the peel. Now in her perceived value of this orange, the inside of the orange holds 100% of the value, and the peel is garbage. It's worthless. John, on the other hand, he's a baker, and this afternoon he wanted to make some orange cupcakes. So he needed the orange peel to be able to zest it into the batter. If he gets the orange, he intends to simply use the peel and throw away the orange's sweet inside into the trash. Unlike Julia, who places 100% of the orange's value on its ability to be eaten as an afternoon snack, John believes that that part of the orange is completely worthless. Instead, he places 100% of the value into the orange peel. Now, I'm sure you can see the interesting thing here about value. This one orange could serve 100% of the needs for each person involved in this transaction, if only they could communicate their true desires for that orange. They could both have 100% of the value because the value is perceived by the end recipient, and in this case, our 2 roommates each view it differently. Now, to the grocer who is the original supplier of this orange, he sold that orange for $1. Had he known that they both valued that $1 orange for different reasons, Maybe he would have cut the orange apart, separated the insides away from the peel, and sold each portion for $1 each. And if he had done that to each of the roommates, he would have doubled the orange's value for himself. Now, I know that sounds a little crazy, but I bet on exam day, you're going to remember about this orange and value. You're going to remember that the amount of value that something has is based on the recipient's perception of that value, right? It's the recipient that actually is expected to get the value from the products, from those relationships, from the services, from whatever it is that we're expecting to deliver or to facilitate the value for them. Because of this, value is always considered subjective, and it can be quite different from what the original supplier planned for. It may be different from what they had described the product as or what service it was going to fulfill, and from what we originally agreed to. This subjectivity should be captured, measured, and evaluated because this is what we have to work with as an organization that performs service management. Now, let's get back to our definition of value once more. Value is the perceived benefits, usefulness, and importance of something. As I said before, this definition is a bit generic, right? This is because it uses this vague term of something. This word was specifically chosen by the creators of Itil because service management goes beyond just services these days. Because the perceived benefits and usefulness of something really do depend on the context that it's being talked about. In each given context, we know what that something is, and we know what it means in the value definition. But in a generic definition like this, we can't simply list all of the things something could be, so something becomes that placeholder. Because when we talk about value, value is really based on these relationships as well. And we're going to discuss those service relationships in a future lesson. Organizations and people. When we discuss the concept of an organization inside of Itil 4, the organization is not limited to a service provider organization, or an internal information technology organization, or even an information technology organization at large. Instead, we're just looking at this as a generic organization. But what exactly is an organization anyway? Well, Itil 4 defines an organization as a person or a group of people that has its own functions with responsibilities, authorities, and relationships to achieve its objectives. Notice this definition is pretty generic, and again, this is done on purpose by the creators of Itil because it allows Itil to be more widely used and adapted to any organization. In Itil 4, there are two basic roles that an organization can fulfill. A service provider is a role performed by an organization in a service relationship to provide services to consumers. Conversely, a consumer is a role performed by an organization in the relationship that uses or consumes those services. Organizations vary in size and complexity as well. Now, organizations can also vary in their legal structure in that they can be a single person, a team, or even a complex multinational corporation. What really bounds an organization together is a set of common objectives, relationships, and authorities. Now, this may seem strange, especially when considering a single person that can act as an organization, but it really does work this way in the real world. When I created my company, Dion Training Solutions, it was created as a sole proprietorship originally. I was a single person operating as an organization in all of my business relationships. Now, an organization can be a team of people working towards a common objective too. As my company has gotten bigger, we now have two teams of people which make up two distinct organizations within the company. One is the training team, which I lead, and the other is our operations team, which my director of operations leads. Now, the director of operations happens to be my wife, but she has her own team and people who work for her. This is an example of how people are organized around common goals within a larger business organization to achieve common objectives in a coordinated method. Now, in most of these cases, the common objectives are usually trying to create value for the consumer, but the way value is actually achieved has changed in Itil 4. Previously, value was considered something that was delivered from a service provider to the consumer of the service, but this wasn't entirely accurate the way it was done in the real world. In fact, it was so inaccurate that sayings like delivering something is easy, but delivering something of value is hard began to spring up all throughout the IT service management industry. So instead, Itil 4 recognizes that value must be co-created by the service provider and the consumer. Now, what does this mean for us in the real world? Well, let's take this course as an example. My team and I have spent a lot of time preparing this course, filming this course, editing this course, and publishing this course so that you could get value from it. And I truly believe this is the best course that's out there today. And as such, I place a lot of value on the content, and I hope you do as well. But let's look at it from your perspective as the consumer. Is this course truly valuable? Well, you've exchanged some of your hard-earned money to get access to this training, so you probably feel that it has some amount of value or you wouldn't have given me your money to access this course. Now, if you're like most students, you probably are going to measure this based on the fact of seeing if it adequately prepares you to pass the foundation exam. But for you to achieve that desired value, passing the exam, we have to co-create that value together. As the supplier, I've provided you with all the videos, the quizzes, the practice exam, the web servers, access to the training, downloadable PDFs, all of that. But as the consumer, you have to actually watch those videos, study the definitions, practice with the quizzes, take the practice exams. Not to mention, you have to have a laptop, a tablet, or a phone to even access these videos and be able to watch them, as well as a stable, high-speed internet connection. To achieve the desired outcome and value from this course, we both have to work hard and meet our ends of this obligation. That's the idea of co-creation of value by the service provider, me and my team, and you, the consumer. This is how it works inside of Itil 4. Now, as much as I'd love to be able to simply create the value for you as soon as you make the purchase, we don't have that technology yet to instantly load up the information into your head. This isn't the Matrix after all. Instead, you have to help me to create the value we both want, which is for you to pass your certification exam on the first attempt. As a supplier, I can try really hard to deliver that value, but if you as the consumer don't actually cooperate and turn on the videos and watch them, well, then the value simply won't be created because the value is the outcome. It's you getting that certification done. This is why relationships between organizations, such as the supplier and the consumer, have become very complex. In the simplest form, the provider would deliver a service, the consumer would pay for the service, and the provider then uses that money to create more services while the consumer uses the current service they paid for. Now, if both sides are getting the value they desire from that transaction, then this is mutually beneficial. If the value is not achieved by either of these sides, though, then it's likely that this relationship will soon come to an end, and no more value will emerge from it. Unfortunately, the real world is much more complex than the simple example of value creation I just gave. At any moment, an organization can be a consumer and a provider for multiple services. Let's take my organization, for example. I'm a supplier in relation to you, but I'm also a consumer in my relationship with my web hosting provider. These are just different hats being worn by my organization depending on which perspective we're looking at things from. This means that when my organization is acting as a consumer, we co-create value by consuming services, and when we're acting as a provider, we co-create value by providing services to other organizations and people. Organizations recognize that value is co-created through an active collaboration between providers and consumers, as well as other organizations that are part of the relevant service relationships. These service provider and service consumer roles are the two generic roles that an organization can fulfill. People, though, can fulfill three other types of roles. This is the role of a user, a customer, and a sponsor. The first role is that of a user. A user is simply a person who uses a service. The second role is that of a customer. A customer is the person who defines the requirements for a service and takes responsibility for the outcomes of service consumption. The third role is that of a sponsor. A sponsor is a person who authorizes the budget for service consumption. The term sponsor is also used in some organizations to describe an organization or department or an individual that provides financial or other support for an initiative. While these are the three roles, these roles could be fulfilled by different people, or all three of these roles could be fulfilled by the same person. Let's consider a simple scenario where all three roles are going to be filled by the same person. Maybe it's been a few years and you decided to buy a brand new car. Let's say you're all excited about all the technological improvements that have been made in the world of cars, and you decide to get one that can perform semi-autonomous driving, like a Tesla. As a user, you're really excited to drive your new Tesla because it has so many cool features like the autopilot, the comfortable leather seats, and a really fast electric motor. As a customer, though, you may not see a big difference in the features between a Model S and a Model 3, so you're trying to decide which model best meets your requirements and helps you achieve your outcomes most efficiently when you're consuming the service of this semi-autonomous vehicle. Now, in your third role as a sponsor, you start to weigh the cost of the Model 3 versus the Model S, and you try to determine which one should you budget for in order to meet the needs of your semi-autonomous car that's going to drive you from point A to point B and get you to work each day. Now, all three of these roles have competing interests. The user wants the best features when they consume the service, but they'd probably be happy with either the Model 3 or the Model S. They're both really nice cars after all. The customer in you actually defines the requirements, though, for your new car. They define that one has to be able to drive semi-autonomously. They want one that can drive at least 200 miles before needing to be refueled or recharged, and other kind of requirements like that. Your third role is that of the sponsor, and this is where things come from a cost perspective. While I might like the Model S, it sells for almost $100,000. Can the Model 3 still meet all of the customer's requirements even though it sells for only $60,000? Well, if so, then the sponsor would rather choose the less expensive option. So whenever you buy yourself a new car, you're really balancing these three roles before you make the decision, and you're doing this all inside your own head. Now, let's consider it a little bit differently. Let's say we're going to buy a car for somebody else. My daughter is almost to the age where she's old enough to drive, and so she's going to be the user in this scenario because she wants her parents to buy her first car for her. She doesn't care how much it costs. She doesn't have any requirements. She just knows that she's going to consume the resource, and she needs to be able to get in and drive from point A to point B. In this case, this means that she can drive wherever she wants, and she'll be able to drive whatever her mother and I decide to buy for her. Now, my wife, on the other hand, is going to be our customer. She's going to set the requirements for this service, the car in our particular example, and this service is going to have to meet those requirements, and she's going to be the one taking responsibility for our daughter's actions when she consumes that service. In this case, when our daughter is driving, my wife's going to be responsible for whatever happens because she's the customer. Now, my wife may create some requirements for this new car. She might say that it has to have 4 seats, that it has to have 4 doors. Maybe it has to have a driver and passenger airbag. The car might have to be less than 10 years old. Whatever the requirements is that she decides, she has that ability because she's the customer. Now, our third role is the sponsor, and this is the person who's going to pay for the initiative. In this case, the one of buying a car for my daughter, I'm going to be the sponsor. I'm going to have to pay for this thing. I have created a budget for this car, let's say no more than $10,000. And that means the customer, my wife, can pick any car that she wants for the user, my daughter, but this car has to be within that budget of $10,000. So I guess my wife isn't going to be able to go out and buy her a brand new car, even though the customer may want that, or the user may want that. Instead, the customer has been allocated a specific budget and they have to stay within that. So this is the same type of thing that happens in business all of the time. Sometimes in business, you get to act as 1, 2, or 3 of these roles, depending on the scenario. For example, you may define what is needed for your business team, and you may have the authority to allocate and authorize the budget for those requirements, and you're going to be both the customer and sponsor in that case. But your team members are going to be the users because they're going to use what you buy. This is actually a great position to be in because the person authorizing the budget is also the person making the requirements decisions. Unfortunately, though, in a lot of large organizations, the person who authorizes the budget for an IT service is not a customer or a user of that service. And this type of disconnect can actually cause problems because the sponsor who funds the requirements and the customer who creates those requirements often have arguments over what those requirements should be. Because the sponsor is focused on the efficiency and cost savings, whereas the customers are focused on the requirements and the users are focused on the usability of this service. This can create a gap between the user and the customer's interests as well. As a service provider, it's our responsibility to recognize these 3 generic roles on a consumer side and to work with them appropriately to ensure the right service is being delivered and supplied to meet those needs. This means we need to ensure that the financials work for the sponsor, that the requirements are met for the customer, and the users get what they expect in usability of our service. At the end of the day, we want to achieve user satisfaction, customer satisfaction, and sponsor satisfaction, because when all 3 come together, we're more likely to have repeat business from the consumer's organization. Itil was first created around the idea of how to conduct service management within our organizations, so it should be no surprise that we have a specific definition of what is considered a service. The definition of a service is something you should be able to recall for the exam, as well as understand it. According to Itil 4, a service is a means of enabling value co-creation by facilitating outcomes that the customer wants to achieve without that customer having to manage the specific costs and risks. Now, let's dig into this definition one piece at a time. First, service is a means of enabling value co-creation. This portion of the definition is a reference back to how value is determined as a result of the relationship between the provider of the service and the customer of the service. Next, the second portion of the definition says that this is done by facilitating outcomes that customers want to achieve. Again, this goes back to the concept of value. If I'm giving you something as a service provider that doesn't help you as the customer to achieve your objectives, well, then it doesn't have any value. So going back to the earlier example of this course, if it doesn't help you pass your certification exam, then the value hasn't been co-created. After all, The service provider can't achieve your objectives for you. You have to achieve them yourself. The service provider is only able to facilitate the achievement of those customer outcomes. After all, you have to pass the exam. I can only provide you with the tools and the resources you need to be successful. The same holds true with IT services. I can ensure your computer is up and able to run a program, but if you don't provide the necessary inputs to that program, you're going to be unable to get the necessary outputs and eventually the outcomes you desire. Now, the final portion of the service definition states that this co-created value is created without the customer having to manage specific costs and risks. This refers to the whole reason why a customer hires a service provider in the first place. For example, I'm a customer of a web hosting company that hosts all of my training videos. So my organization pays this web hosting company a monthly fee for hosting terabytes of video files for us. And in exchange for that service, we pay them a nominal monthly fee. It's their job as the service provider to manage all the specific costs and risks associated with that service. For example, our contract allows for unlimited data storage on their servers and unlimited bandwidth to be used without incurring any additional cost to us under our contract because we negotiate a fixed fee contract. Now, my company employs a lot of very technical folks. I personally have been responsible for running hundreds of web servers, domain controllers, mail servers, and file servers throughout my career. So why doesn't Dion Training maintain and host our own web servers to host all of our video training courses? Well, simply put, we don't want to have to deal with the costs and the risks of providing that particular service. It just isn't the business that we're in anymore, right? Instead, we're focused on training. Our business is all about training, not running these large server farms. So we don't want to have to deal with the patching, the updating, the backups, scaling up and scaling down based on load demands, and all of that. Instead, for a negotiated flat fee with our service provider, we can take all of those costs and risks from us, and we can simply pay our contracted rate, and the service provider gets to deal with it. This is exactly what the service definition is referring to. So let's take a look at that service definition one more time. A service is a means of enabling value co-creation by facilitating outcomes that customers want to achieve without the customer having to manage specific costs and risks. So in addition to services, a service organization can actually provide services based on products that they have as well. Now, a product is a configuration of an organization's resources that's designed to offer value for a consumer. I like to think of this as a collection of services that we put together to give more value than they could individually. Now, every organization works with a set of resources. These resources are either owned by the organizations, belong to the organization, or are managed by the organization. These resources may even be supporting services provided by the organization's suppliers and their partners. These resources can be leased or rented. These resources could even be the people who work in an organization under a contractual agreement because these people are a resource to the organization too. Now, the way an organization configures all those resources into a set offering is the essence of a product. For example, Amazon Web Services, or AWS, has a lot of different service offerings, including server hosting under their EC2 brand, file storage under S3, domain name server systems under Route 53, and many others. But these services, they aren't necessarily considered products. Now, if you compare these individual services with the Amazon Light Sale product, you can see how Amazon has combined their EC2, their S3, and their Route 53 services into a single product that can be sold directly to a customer in a defined configuration. Everything that makes up Light Sale is available as a service individually from AWS, but when combined under the Light Sale product, Amazon removed a lot of the complexity and confusion associated with that typical new customer's journey into the AWS and into cloud computing. So I know we covered a lot in this lesson, but there's two key definitions that we covered that you need to know. First is service. A service is a means of enabling value co-creation by facilitating outcomes that the customer wants to achieve without the customer having to manage those specific costs and risks. And the second one is a product. A product is simply a configuration of an organization's resources designed to offer value for a consumer. Keep those two definitions in your head because you're going to need them come test day. So at this point, we've discussed service management, value, organizations and people, and services and products. In this lesson, I want to briefly consider the concept of a service offering. The reason I'm spending this lesson on service offerings is because it's a concept that you need to be able to describe and discuss on the exam. This concept falls under the understand level of knowledge for the certification exam. Now, first, what is a service offering? Well, a service offering is a description of one or more services designed to address the needs of a target consumer group. In essence, a service provider is going to present their services to customers or consumers in the form of service offerings, which describes one or more of their services that are based on one or more of their products. Now, service offerings can include goods, access to resources, and service actions as part of that service offering. Let's take my own company as an example of a service provider. We have many different products that can help you when you're studying for your certification exams. I think you're getting the idea here as I'm talking about this of what a service offering is. It shows you how we can group and sell those different products and services multiple times in multiple different ways, depending on the consumer we're trying to reach. You may have seen this with companies that offer things as a monthly service where different service offerings happen based on the different functionalities at the different price points. For example, I use Hulu at my home, which is a video on demand service. Hulu has a few different pricing tiers. The cheapest option is about $8 per month, and it gives you all of the TV shows you want, but you have to watch commercials. Instead, we decided to opt for the next higher price, which is going to allow us to pay $12 per month, but it eliminates all of those commercials. Now Hulu even has added a third tier. They have a $40 per month offering, and this gives you access to all of the TV without commercials, but it also gives you access to live news, sports, and other things, and a cloud-based DVR service. So as you moved up the pricing tier, you got additional services as part of that service offering. Now let's go back one more time to the definition of a service offering. If you remember, a service offering is a description of one or more services designed to address the needs of a target consumer group. Now remember, service offerings can include goods, access to resources, and service actions as part of that service offering too. So before we close out this lesson, we're going to quickly define these three items. First, we have goods. Goods are things that are supplied to the consumer. These are things that are transferred from the service provider to the consumer, and once that occurs, the consumer is now responsible for that future use. For example, if you went and signed up for a new service offering from your local cell phone provider, they're going to give you a phone that you can use. But you're now responsible for that phone. If you break it, you're going to have to pay to get a new one. If you lose it and somebody makes $1,000 in long-distance calls, well, you're going to be the one getting the bill. The goods, meaning the cell phone here, were transferred from the service provider to you, and now you as the consumer are responsible for it. The second thing a service might offer is to provide access to resources. This means that access to resources is granted or a license is given to a consumer under some agreed terms and conditions. My website is a great example of this. When you purchase a membership at my website, you're given access to the videos, the practice exams, hands-on labs, and all the other stuff that we have there. You're given a license to use them under the terms and conditions that you agreed to when you signed up. These resources all remain under the service provider's control, and the service provider is responsible for ensuring that you can use them in the way it was promised. Now, here's where things get a little messy for consumers sometimes, though. Sometimes you may not like the way the service provider is willing to let you use their service. For example, our website doesn't allow videos to be downloaded because we're a subscription-based service. So if you stop paying your monthly subscription fee, you stop having access to those videos. Therefore, we don't want you to have them all downloaded on your hard drive, or you could sign up for service one day, download all 20 of our courses, and cancel service the next day. This is because we didn't transfer the ownership of that video to you. Instead, we're just giving you the access or a license to it to use it and watch it as much as you want, as long as your subscription remains active. Now, if you don't like those terms and conditions, you're going to have to find a different course or a different way to purchase that course that does allow you to have that one-time payment where you can download it and use it as much as you want. But again, that's up to the relationship between you and your service provider. As a service provider, we control the resource and we're giving you access to it under this service offering. Now, the third thing that might be a part of a service offering is a service action. This is an action that's performed to address a consumer's need. Let's use the example of a piece of software you might have a license for when you're building a website. For example, our website uses a piece of software as the basis of our learning management system. We paid for the software with a one-time fee, and we were given rights to use it indefinitely, as much as we want, without having to pay any recurring fees. Now, this falls under the goods category, right? Well, that part of it does. But for that one-time fee, we're not going to get any support and we're not going to get any updates or patches. And if we want that technical support for the software, including the patches and the security updates, then we're going to have to pay for that part of the service offering, which is considered a service action. Because of this, we have opted to pay an annual fee to the company, and in return for that, we have 24-hour-a-day, 7-day-a-week technical support access to their staff, and we can ask any questions we want, and we also get access to all the security updates and patches as they're going to be released. So that's the difference between goods, access to resources, and service actions. Goods are going to be transferred over to the consumer. Access to the resources is going to let the consumer access them on the terms and conditions in the license that's been granted from the service provider. And service actions are going to be covering things that are going to be ongoing things like technical support and customer service fees. That's the way you need to remember it for the exam. Service relationships. This is what being a service provider is all about. To create value, an organization has to provide more than just a service. They have to work with their consumers and their customers to build an ongoing relationship. Now, in the business world, just as in our love life, relationships are challenging and sometimes difficult. In this lesson, we're going to take a look at what a service relationship is and why it can be so complicated. First, let's cover the definition of a service relationship. A service relationship is a cooperation between a service provider and a service consumer that includes service provision, service consumption, and service relationship management. This is a fairly straightforward concept. Basically, it's when two organizations want to work together, they have a relationship that's formed. During this relationship, one of these organizations might assume the role of the service provider and the other becomes the consumer. Right now, you and I have a service relationship. I'm the service provider and you're the consumer of the training service that we're offering. But like I said, it can be much more complicated than that. But I'm getting a little ahead of myself here. Let's first talk about service provision. What is service provision? Well, service provision is the activities that are performed by an organization to provide the services. This includes things like managing the service provider's resources, configuring them to deliver the service, providing access to the resources to the users, and fulfilling the agreed upon service actions, as well as conducting service level management and even performing continual improvement to those services. Service provision can even include supplying goods to the consumer as well. Now, let's consider when you go and buy a new cell phone from your cell phone service provider. You walk into the store and they give you a phone, which is good, right? And they activate your phone by giving you a brand new phone number, and this is actually called account provisioning. This establishes your new user account, your new phone number in this case, and they assign different features such as voicemail and text messaging and a data plan and other things to your account. By the time they're done, you can walk out of the store with your new phone number, and working cellular service. That is all service provisioning by your service provider. Now, when you walk out the door, you're going to use your new cell phone, and now you're going to become a consumer who's beginning to do what is known as service consumption. Service consumption includes all of the activities performed by an organization or a single person in the case of your new cell phone, and this is going to allow you to consume those new services. Service consumption includes things like the management of the consumer's resources that are needed to use the service, such as you paying your bill every month to make sure the service stays working, as well as all the other actions you perform to utilize the provider's resources, such as checking your email or making phone calls on your new smartphone. Or it can even be requesting new service actions to be fulfilled. For example, you might be getting ready to fly from one country to another, and you need your service provider to enable data roaming on your phone. This again is one of those things that can happen inside of service consumption. When the consumer is doing something, this is called service consumption. Now, in addition to service provisioning and service consumption, there are some activities that are done by both the service provider and the service consumer. And when they do these things together, they're trying to enable value co-creation to occur based upon the agreed and available service offerings. This is known as service relationship management. The most basic of the things here are things like having the consumer paying their bill on time so their monthly subscription doesn't get canceled and the service doesn't get turned off. Or it may be that the service provider needs to ensure they're communicating with the consumer about a possible network outage that's going to occur because this weekend there's going to be a server upgrade. This back and forth communication is what we call service relationship management. So now that we know a little bit about service relationships, including service provisioning, service consumption, and service relationship management, let's dig into the complicated portion of this topic, the service relationship model. As I said, business can be complicated, and because of this, we have to consider the different relationships that are involved in any single service. For example, let's consider my website, diontraining.com. We offer training services over video to our students just like you. Now, if you're watching this video on diontraining.com, that means there are a lot of different service relationships that have already occurred behind the scenes to enable that to happen. Let's place you in the organization D spot here on the far right. Now, you want to watch this video, but for that to happen, the video has to get to you. Well, that happens because you have a service relationship in place with our company. In this relationship, you are the consumer and we're the service provider. But to make this work, we rely on service providers as well. We don't host our own videos, for example, but instead we outsource that to a very large video streaming company with cloud servers all over the world to ensure that you get the best quality with the lowest latency. Let's put them up here as Organization B. Now, in the relationship between Dion Training and the video streaming company, we are the consumer and the video streaming company is the service provider. But that video streaming service we use, they don't even own their own servers. No, instead they rely on Google Cloud, and that means the video streaming service is actually a consumer too, while Google is going to be their service provider. But to make it even more complicated, there are departments inside of Google that work on IT systems, right? Well, some of those people are actually members of my website, and they take this very same training that you're in right now. And so when they're logged into my website to watch those videos, they're now going to be the consumers, and I'm the service provider once more. You can see how this interrelationship can get really messy and really complicated. The bottom line here is I want you to realize that in most cases, organizations are going to be both a service provider to someone and a service consumer themselves. This is what this diagram is showing with just these 4 companies we discussed in this example. If I was going to draw out every relationship for every service offering within my company, I would have to fill 100 or more of these screens because of all of the different relationships we have, and we're just a small company. If you think about how messy this would be for somebody like Facebook or LinkedIn or Microsoft or Google, it can just blow your mind. So for the exam, I want you to remember, your organization may be a service provider or a service consumer, or they can be both. It all depends on the scenario and the service relationships that are involved. Outcomes. Back when we discussed the definition of a service, we said that a service was a means of enabling value co-creation by facilitating outcomes that a customer wants to achieve, without the customer having to manage the specific costs and risks. Now, in this lesson, we're going to dig into a single word from that definition, the word outcome. An outcome is a result for a stakeholder enabled by one or more outputs. This is focused on the customer's desired outcome, not the service provider's though, and this is important to understand. Now, outcomes are important to consider as part of the balancing act between the supported outcomes, the removal of costs, and the removal of risks against unwanted or undesirable outcomes, the costs and the risks that could be introduced by the customer if they decide to instead set up and manage their own resources. Now, let's consider an example of what we're really discussing here. In my local area, we have 2 major ride-sharing companies that operate. We have Uber and we have Lyft. Now, whichever you prefer here really doesn't matter, but I tend to take Uber more often than Lyft myself. Now, I really like these ride-sharing services, especially when I'm traveling to a large downtown area for a conference or a convention, or when I need to get from the airport to my house or something like that. Now, as a customer, I have a desired outcome. I want to get from point A to point B in the least amount of time with a fair amount of cost. For example, the last trip I took to San Francisco, I didn't even need to rent a car because I simply used Uber and Lyft to get from the airport to my hotel and from my hotel to various locations around the city that I needed to go to for my work. Now, this allowed me to get the outcome that I desired, which was getting from point A to point B in less time and with less hassle. Now, because I used the Uber app, I was able to reduce my overall cost because I didn't need to have a rental car. I didn't need to spend $75 per night to park that rental car at my hotel. And I didn't need to buy gas for that rental car. I didn't need to purchase insurance for the rental car. You're getting the idea here. I was able to remove a lot of the costs because as a customer, I simply paid for the service every time I needed it, and I was able to achieve my desired outcome, getting from point A to point B. Now, if we consider the risks involved, I was able to reduce some of my risk as well. For example, I tend to find it very difficult to park in large cities, especially near the areas of town that I need to visit for a work trip. So when I used Uber, I could eliminate the risk of not finding adequate parking when I got to my desired location. Instead, I just get out of the car and I'm there. I also eliminated the risk of somebody stealing my rental car while it's parked or breaking into it and stealing my luggage. All those type of things are eliminated and it's no longer a risk for me. Now, I think you're starting to get the idea here. There's lots of different costs and lots of different risks that can be reduced if you're using a service. And I can gain the benefits of the service as a customer by using this ride-sharing app instead of renting my own car whenever I travel to a big city. Now, conversely though, I need to balance this with the other side of the equation. There are certain costs and risks that I'm assuming by choosing to use Uber or Lyft instead of renting my own car. First, there's cost imposed upon me by the service provider. Beyond the actual service cost to get from point A to point B, there's also a requirement that I maintain a smartphone to run the app, and I have to ensure that I have a data plan on that smartphone, and I have to make sure that my smartphone has enough battery power. All of this are things that have to happen so that I can connect the app from my phone to their central server in order to order that Uber to my location and have them pick me up. Now, this goes back to our original point about value, right? Value is co-created, and a service is all about co-creating value by facilitating those outcomes that the customer wants to achieve without the customer having to manage the specific costs and risks of that service. So as a customer of this ride-sharing service, I need to co-create the value of the service by having a smartphone and an active data plan and enough battery power to run it. Now, Uber, on the other hand, needs to ensure that all the other technical details of the service are taken care of. They're going to provide the servers that enable the service. They're going to enable the technology and the software code and all of that other stuff. Now, I mentioned that the customer doesn't want to manage the specific costs and risks. What risk might there be with using an Uber instead of having your own rental car? Well, I've had an occasion or two where I've had to wait for my Uber to arrive because there's none in the area, and sometimes this will take me 10 or 15 minutes. Now, if I'm running a really tight schedule, there's a risk that I can miss my meeting. There's also a risk that a driver just isn't in the area when I need one. And so if you happen to go to a city center where there's a lot of Ubers and you travel to a location in the suburbs where there's not a lot of Ubers, well, this can become a problem when you're trying to get a ride back to the city. This is a risk that you're going to assume. If you had a rental car, you wouldn't have this risk because you could simply jump in the car, turn the key, and start driving. Now, as we have these costs and risks that the service has now imposed upon me as their customer, I now have to decide whether I should ultimately use their service or say it's not worth the effort and I'll simply rent a car and drive myself around. Now, this is the idea that we're all going to be thinking about when we think about a service, whether we're the one using the service or the one providing the service. That decision is going to be based on value. All of this comes back to value. If the value is being co-created to achieve the supported outcomes, then the removal of the cost and the removal of risk has to be greater than the unintended consequences. And if that's true, the introduction of these new costs or the introduction of new risks has to be balanced and shifted in the favor of the consumer if you want them to buy the service from the service provider. In this case, ordering an Uber or a Lyft instead of renting a car. It's all just about balancing this value, right? If we're the service provider or a service provider organization, like Uber in this case, we need to make sure that we're giving more value and removing more costs and risks than we're introducing. And this way, the customer will want to use it. Now, in order for the customer to see the value that we're generating, this has to be true. It has to tip the scales towards the customer side. Now, as the service provider, we want to make sure we're getting value in this too. If we're the customer, we need to make sure that we're not creating additional costs or risks for ourselves that outweigh the benefits of the service that we're going to consume. So if I'm going to go ahead and outsource my servers, I want to make sure that it's cheaper for me to do that and provides me more value for me to do that than just to simply run the servers myself. Now, each person or organization is going to weigh the value proposition and they're going to determine if it makes sense for them. If it does, we're going to have a valid business agreement and we're going to be able to go into business together. You're going to provide me a service and I'm going to pay you to do that as the consumer or the customer. So going back to my example of Uber or Lyft, I find it works great for me when I'm traveling in a big city where the parking prices tend to be very high, the traffic tends to be heavy, and the number of drivers around is quite abundant, so it's easy for me to get a Lyft or an Uber when I need one. But when I travel to more remote locations, I prefer to have my own rental car because it solves the problem for me much more efficiently because there's less risk of me not finding a parking space because parking is low cost in those areas and traffic is less of an issue because I'm outside the city center. This is the whole idea of balancing those pros and those cons so we can make the idea and figure out what gives us the most value. So we've talked a lot about outcomes so far in all of these examples. But there's also a similar concept known as outputs that it's important to understand when you take the exam. An output is a tangible or intangible deliverable or an artifact that's created by an activity. Now, for the exam, you have to understand the difference between an output and an outcome. Services facilitate outcomes through one or more outputs. So what does that mean? Well, an output could be a report. It could be a bill that you receive at the end of the service that you've consumed. Or it can even be an email if you're using a webmail service. All of these things are considered outputs. They're that tangible item that comes out of using that service. Now, I like to think about this in a more tangible way though. Consider this course. When I'm writing and filming this lesson, the output is the final video that you're watching right now. But this isn't the outcome, it's just the output. So if the video isn't the outcome, what is? Well, it's the desired value that you're trying to achieve from this video. In the case of this video and the others in this course, the outcome for a student like you is to be able to pass your Itil 4 foundation exam. If you're able to do that after watching these videos, then you've achieved the outcome that both you and I have desired. This is an important concept and one that people often confuse because the output is easily measured, but often the outcomes are not. It's easy for me to create an outline and list all of the videos that we're going to produce for this course. We can say, for example, there's going to be 100 videos in this course. And if I've already filmed 12 of those videos, then I'm 12% complete with creating this course. And so I have outputted 12% of the product. Now, this is measuring outputs though, right? It's not measuring outcomes. Do we know that 100 videos is the right number to help you as a student get from the beginning to the end and pass the exam? Well, if the outcome we want to achieve is a student passing, then 100 videos might not be the right measure. Maybe it only takes 25 videos, or maybe it takes 200 videos. We'll have to figure that out and measure that as we go. And as we figure out what things are working, what things aren't, we add or we remove to the course to make sure that our students are always going to be able to pass the exam. Now, output is part of an outcome, but there's more to it than just outputs. So when you think of outcomes, I want you to remember that it's what you're able to achieve as a result of the activity, as a result of this interaction, not just the outputs that are being created. Going back to my Uber and Lyft example, the outcome is me getting across town and to my meeting on time because of the service provided by those companies. The outcomes of taking this course isn't to say that you sat here and watched 100 videos for X number of hours, or whatever it happens to be, but instead it's focused on you passing the exam. That's the outcome that both you and I want to achieve here. Now, because of this, outcomes can be a bit more intangible, where outputs tend to be much more tangible. They're things you can touch and feel, like papers and reports and things like that. It also means that outputs are easier to measure because of the results of an activity. So when building your service metrics, be careful not to measure just outputs, but instead you need to put some thought behind how you're going to measure your outcomes as well. Because otherwise, you're going to have people working for you that game the system. They're going to be pushing different things to make it look like all those outputs are really high, but you're never going to achieve the outcomes you want. So really think about that as you're building those metrics, and be sure to measure your outcomes, not just your outputs. In this lesson, we're going to discuss cost. Now, the cost of something is the amount of money that's spent on a particular activity or a particular resource. While cost is usually expressed financially, it can also be expressed in non-financial ways too. For example, when we create a new course here, we actually measure the cost of the course in the number of hours spent creating it. A typical course like this one might require 400 or 500 hours worth of effort across our entire staff. This usually is described in either the measurement of man-hours or FTEs. Man-hours are also known as person-hours because we want to be equal opportunist here. FTEs, on the other hand, stands for full-time equivalent, and it's used to measure things based on a single employee who works 40 hours per week for an entire year. This equates to roughly 2,000 hours worth of work. So if we need to run a web server to host all of our courses, that might require half of an FTE, or 1/2 of a person's annual available work hours for the entire year. This describes the number of FTEs, or full-time equivalent employees, that are required in order to undertake a particular activity. Now, while I like to measure things from an hours of effort perspective, this does ultimately translate back to financial cost. Each team member on my team earns a salary, and if it takes somebody half of their entire year to run that web server, that means half of their salary is tied up in keeping that web server up and running. So it does end up going back to cost eventually. But when we look at our reports, we're actually more concerned with the amount of time things take than the amount of money we spend on them. Now, depending on your organization, you may choose to measure things based on the man-hours, the person-hours, the FTEs, or using actual dollars and cents that are expended. Either way, the service provider is aiming to reduce or remove costs when they provide a service. So if a service provider can save you more money than their service is going to cost you, you're certainly going to look at using that service, right? I know I would. For example, my internet service provider has varying speeds available that we could choose to use here at our office. We could choose to spend $50 per month for a 100 megabit per second connection, or $100 per month for a 1,000 megabit per second connection. Which one should we choose? Well, in our case, we upload a lot of large files because of all the videos that we produce. And when we looked at the speed that we were going to purchase, we decided that paying twice as much money per month for a 10 times increase in speed was well worth it, because it saves our staff a lot of time uploading those files. So it became an easy decision, because spending $50 more per month on the faster internet connection made my staff much more productive, and it saves us a lot of wasted labor hours. And this more than made up for the additional cost in the labor savings that we were able to get. That's the idea when you look at cost. If you're going to outsource a service or you're going to pay for something, you want to make sure it's giving you more value than what it's costing you. In our case, spending twice as much on internet gave us 10 times more value, and so it was definitely worth doing. At this point in the course, we've already mentioned the word risk a few times, but I wanted to dive into it in a little bit more detail in this lesson. Risk refers to a possible event that could cause harm, loss, or make it more difficult to achieve your objectives. Essentially, it's any possible event that could impact our ability to co-create that value through our services. Generally, when most people think of risk in service management, they think about it from a new installation or a project perspective, but risk is also present in the form of our services too. From a service provider perspective, our goal is to minimize risk for our customers who use our services. In this way, risks are similar to cost. But just like cost, our customers will assume that some new risk is going to occur as part of their consumption of our services. For example, if we go back to my Uber example, where I was a customer using the app to get rides all over San Francisco, I removed the risk of not finding a parking space for my rental car since the service removed my need for me to have my own rental car in the first place. However, I now run the risk of not being able to call for an Uber if the app malfunctions. Or what if I'm in an area where there's no cellular service? Or what if my phone battery dies? All of these are new risks that are introduced into my desired outcome of traveling around San Francisco. Now, as a consumer of the service, I can also contribute to reducing the risk by taking some mitigating actions. For example, I could carry around a spare battery pack with me. By doing this as a consumer, I'm reducing the risk that I won't be able to call for an Uber when I need one because of my battery dying. At the same time, I might also communicate to Uber that I'm finding it difficult to use their service in more rural areas. Maybe when I'm outside the city, I'm not getting enough Uber drivers in that area. By more clearly articulating my needs and my requirements, then the service provider can determine if they're able to better meet them. Maybe Uber is going to decide that they're going to pay a premium or bonus to their drivers who will work in those more rural areas outside the city center. That might increase the number of drivers on those streets and make it easier for customers to get a ride. Now, as a consumer, it's up to me to clearly communicate my needs to that service provider and to clarify the outcomes that I want to achieve. I also need to make sure I'm communicating any constraints or critical success factors that I may have for that service. This means I'm putting requirements on that service provider, right? Well, guess what? The service provider may also put requirements on me as a customer too. In the example of Uber, they require me to have a cell phone, a valid data plan, and the ability to send my GPS location to their drivers by using the location tracking feature on my phone. This is a two-way street after all. We're both working to co-create the value and reduce the overall risk. Now, since risk is a possible event that could cause harm or make it more difficult for us to achieve our objectives, we can do some things to mitigate that risk. Well, what are those things that we can do? There's actually 4 things we can do with risk. We can avoid risk, we can accept risk, we can transfer risk, or we can mitigate risk. Now, when we avoid risk, we're aiming to actually remove it completely from the service. Now, in reality, we can't remove all of the risk for a service because risk is something that's inherent in everything that a business does to some level and some degree. But there are certain risks that we can avoid completely. For example, let's say that you're running a service that allows people to read your blog. Maybe you're worried about the new privacy regulations and don't want to have to worry about maintaining all of the blog readers' information securely and properly under the new GDPR provisions. Well, you could avoid those issues completely if you turn off tracking on your readers' information by disabling any cookies, and you can also remove any requests for their email addresses and other things like that. If you're not collecting their information, you no longer have to protect that information. Now, this may not be the best business decision, right? Because most businesses want to be able to track their customers and contact them by email with offers. So while you can avoid this whole situation, it's probably better if we found a better way to handle this risk. And that brings us to simply accepting the risk. With this option, you look at the cost of protecting against the risk, and you look at the possible bad outcomes and determine that it's simply cheaper to pay to accept the risk and pay up if you're going to get caught. Now, going back to our privacy example, I have a friend who is in an Australian-based company, which is outside of the European Union. Because of this, he's taken the position that he's not worried about complying with the GDPR policies because he's an Australian, living in Australia, and he has an Australian company. He isn't actively targeting European customers, but if they happen to go to his site, too bad. He's calculated the risk, and he believes the risk is low that the EU is going to try to fine him or even collect if they do. So he's taken no actions in regard to changing the way his website works or the way his business works. He's going to do it the exact same way he did before GDPR to the way it is after GDPR. Now, this is called risk acceptance. Now, the next thing we could do is we can instead decide to transfer the risk. Maybe you don't want to be responsible for collecting and storing all of this private information, but you still want access to that data. Well, in that case, you can hire a service provider to collect it for you, to store it securely, and to give you access. This would be a form of risk transfer. Another option might be that you take the approach that my Australian friend did, and he simply is going to pay some insurance in case you get sued or fined. This transfers the risk to the insurance company because you paid them a monthly premium to take that risk on for you. Our final option with risk is what's most commonly used. It's known as risk mitigation. With risk mitigation, we put in place some actions to help reduce the risk, even if it doesn't eliminate it completely. In our privacy data example, we may add new technology systems that are going to better protect the data and implement new processes in the way that we handle the data. This will help us reduce the risk and hopefully make the information much more secure, which is one of the intended outcomes of GDPR anyway. But a hacker can still break into our network and steal all of the customer's data. If this happens, we might have reduced the risk, but we didn't eliminate the risk. That's the idea of risk mitigation. Utility and warranty are two terms that every Itil student simply has to know. They're going to come up time and time again throughout your training and in the real world. Utility refers to the functionality offered by a particular product and service to meet a particular need. This really is what the product or service does. Utility is what we refer to as fit for purpose. Now, let's take a look at warranty for a moment, and then we're going to compare and contrast these two terms, because comparing and contrasting these terms is something you're going to see on the exam. Warranty is the assurance that the product or service will meet the agreed upon requirements. It is how a service performs. Warranty is concerned with the service's ability to accomplish what it needs to do. This is often referred to as fit for use. Now, to compare and contrast these two terms, let's use the example of a car. As a consumer, you have a requirement to drive a car from point A to point B. You want it to get at least 35 miles per gallon of fuel efficiency, and you live somewhere that gets really hot in the summer and really cold in the winter, so you want a good cold air conditioning system and a really nice warm heater. Now, let's consider these requirements and determine if it meets our utility standard. Remember, utility is about something being fit for purpose, and if I have a small family, I may be able to fit my wife and my 2 kids in a 4-door sedan like a Toyota Prius. So, to carry the family from point A to point B, the Prius would be fit for purpose and it would meet my utility functions. In addition to this, if I bought a brand new Prius, it would certainly have high enough fuel efficiency and have a really nice air conditioner and heating system, so it's going to meet my warranty requirements as well. Remember, warranty is all about fit for use. Does it meet the requirements stated by the consumer? So, since I'm the consumer, I'm going to say that it had to have at least 35 miles a gallon of fuel efficiency and a working air conditioner and heater, and this brand new Prius will certainly meet those requirements. This means it's deemed fit for use. Now, let's say that I bought the car, a few years go by, and my wife has another child. Uh-oh, we already had 2 kids, so this little Prius isn't going to be very good for carrying my entire family around anymore. It no longer is going to be fit for purpose, because anytime I want to go out to dinner as a family, we're now going to have to take 2 cars because we all can't fit into the little Prius. The warranty might still be there because the air conditioner still works and the heater still works and it still gets over 35 miles per gallon. But the intended purpose of getting us all from point A to point B simply can't be accomplished. There's not enough seats and not enough seat belts. And since utility is concerned with fit for purpose, this Prius is no longer meeting my utility needs. So hopefully this little example helps you understand the difference between utility and warranty. Remember for the exam that what a service does is utility. That's driving from point A to point B. On the other hand, how the service does it needs to be considered as part of warranty. That's getting 35 miles per gallon and keeping the inside of the car at the right temperature, not too hot and not too cold. Now, one of the important things to remember is that you need both utility and warranty for a service to operate successfully. In the IT world, we often see people focus on the warranty and they simply forget about utility. If I have a service that runs on a wonderful elastic cloud infrastructure that can handle millions of users simultaneously, that is warranty. IT people like warranty because it's easy to measure. If you require that a service has a defined and agreed upon condition and you meet those conditions, you have good warranty. Warranty simply requires that a service support the performance of the consumer or remove the constraints from the consumer. If the service can be used effectively by the users to share their latest social media posts, on the other hand, that would be considered utility. If the service is always up, meaning it has great warranty, but it doesn't perform the service that the customer wants it to do, meaning it hasn't gotten good utility, then the service is simply going to end up failing. You can't run a successful service without both utility and warranty. Now, for the exam, let me give you a couple of tips. A dead giveaway that they're talking about warranty is if they start mentioning things like availability, capacity, security levels, and continuity. These infrastructure measurements are almost exclusively in the domain of how a service does what it does, and it makes it fit for use. Therefore, these are warranty considerations. On the other hand, if it starts talking about the way it performs and the fact that it allows somebody to accomplish some outcome, then they're usually talking about utility, which is your fit for purpose. Again, going back to our car, can it drive from point A to point B? That's utility. How many miles per gallon it gets and how long the engine stays up and how cold it gets, those are all warranty. In this section of the course, we're going to discuss the 4 dimensions of service management. Now, as we do this, this is going to relate to the describe the 4 dimensions of IT service management objective from the exam. This is considered a Bloom's Level 2 objective, which means that we're going to have to describe it. We're not going to be memorizing the definitions specifically, but we need to understand how this model works and how it applies in Itil. Now, when we talk about the 4 dimensions of IT service management, what we're really talking about is 4 different perspectives. So if I have in the center the value that I'm trying to co-create, I do that by using different products and services that I deliver as a service provider to my consumer or my customer. Now, the consumer and customer has this product that they want to get value from, right? And that means we have to deliver that product or that service. Now, when I go to create a product or service, I look at it from 4 different perspectives. And these 4 perspectives are what we call the 4 dimensions of IT service management. The first one is the organizations and people. The second is information and technology. The third is the partners and suppliers. And the fourth is the value streams and processes. And all around that, I have these external factors you can see around the side that are going to impact the service and products that we're creating as well. Now, we're going to talk about each of these 4 areas and those external factors throughout the rest of this section. Organizations and people. Now, this is going to be the first dimension we're going to consider. Now, even though we've listed these 1, 2, 3, and 4, for Itil's purposes, they're not necessarily in a given order of consideration. They are just listed that way so we can have a way to present it to you inside this video. But I really do think that organizations and people is the first one we need to talk about because it is really one of the most important and one of the hardest to get right. When we talk about organizations and people from the service management perspective, we're thinking about the way we're going to form our organizational structures to support the services and products that we want to deliver to our end users, which is those customers and those consumers. Now, when we talk about these formal organizations, this can be something as large or macro as the way we set up our business. Is our business going to be a sole proprietorship? Is it going to be a limited liability corporation? Is it going to be a multi-level conglomerate? Is it going to be based in the United States or is it going to be based outside the United States? All of those things are formal organizational structures. But then as we get a little bit tighter into the organization, we think about the way we set up the organizational hierarchy inside the organization. Are we going to have a very vertical organization or a very horizontal organization? Let me give you a couple of examples of this. My company, we happen to be a fairly flat organization. We're fairly horizontal. And that means because we're small, we only have 5 to 10 people who work for us at any given time, we can talk to each other directly. We don't have to go up through bureaucratic channels. But some places I've worked before have had hundreds of thousands of employees. As somebody down in IT, I can't go and talk to the CEO. It's just not the way it works. I would talk to my manager, and that manager would talk to his manager, and eventually that message might get up to the CEO. That's a very vertical organization. And so these are things that you have to think about when you're deciding how you're going to structure your organization. If you're going to be very flat and very horizontal, that means you might be able to do things quicker and faster and be more creative. But if you're very vertical, you might be much more process-oriented. And so these are the kind of things you think about when you start thinking about, are we going to deliver our services through a very formal organizational structure? Also, when you think about organizations, how are you going to break up the company? Are you going to have it broken up into sales and marketing as one department, and then the IT services in another, and then the help desk in another, and the administration in another? Well, that all depends, and that's all going to come down to that formal organizational structure. Now, once you figure out what that structure is, you have to staff it with people, right? We have to find all the right people to do the right jobs. And that's the required staffing and competencies. That's that whole human resources part of this whole thing. So once we figure out that we have this company and we have all these different departments we've created, now we have to hire the right managers and leaders for each of those departments and all the right people for those departments. And then we have to make sure that those people stay up to date with their skills. I don't know about you, but I've been working in IT for a long time. It's been about 20 years. And computers today and the way we run them is completely different than what we did 20 years ago. All along the way, my managers and my leadership had to make sure I was going back and getting new training and new skills to make sure my competencies stayed with the current technologies that were out in the world today. And then we have to think about the roles and responsibilities for each person. What is each person's role in this company? What are they going to do? If you're going to be the everything person, and in small companies, you sometimes have everything people, where you have somebody who is going to be the teacher and the editor and the marketer and the salesperson, right? But in most companies, if you're large enough, you're going to have a single role or responsibility. You're going to be an accountant, and maybe not just an accountant at large, but you're going to be a specific accountant for a specific account or a specific customer, right? This is the idea of roles and responsibilities. I have people that come to me all the time and say, I want to get into the IT world. I want to be in IT. I say, great. What do you want to do in IT? Because there are hundreds of different jobs inside of IT. You need to figure out what that goal is, what that role is that you want to attain, so that way we can figure out what the right path is to get you there. And this brings us down to our fourth consideration under organizations and people. And this is what we call culture. When we talk about culture, we're talking about the shared values and attitudes of that organization. And this is by far the hardest thing to get right. So if you look at a company that's out in Silicon Valley, a lot of these startup companies, they have a very friendly culture. It's very informal. You might walk up to the CEO of the company and be like, hey, Brian, how's it going? But if you're working for somebody like IBM, that's a big company that relies on processes and procedures, and everything is done in this big formal method, well, that's a different culture. If you look at Facebook and you look at IBM and you look at a hospital, they're going to have three different cultures. Now, is one of those right and one of those wrong? Not necessarily. It all depends on how your organization wants to set it up so they can take care of its organization and the people inside of it. Now, another part of culture is the communication, and how are we going to communicate within the organization? Are we going to be formal or informal? Are we going to do it in person or by email? All of those things are things that are a cultural thing inside your organization. How much trust and transparency is there in the company? Do your leaders up top tell you what the plans are for the organization? Do they share the vision? Do they share the goals? All of that stuff starts at the top and then works its way down. If you have bad culture at the top, you're going to have bad culture at the bottom, right? And so we need to make sure that we're getting the right culture out to our people. And finally, when we're talking about leaders, we need to have leaders who have a vision of where they want to be, and they need to be advocating for the values and for that vision. So if we're going to say that, our most important thing for us is making sure that our people are taken care of, but then every time your people have a problem, you kick them to the curb and you fire them, that's not really living the values you've been setting. And so you want to make sure as you're thinking about all this stuff, how that culture is going to work together. So when we think about that organization, that's all of those pieces. And then we have the other side of it, which is the individual people. Individual people have a lot of things as well, right? We have each person has their own management and leadership style. Your CEO may have one vision and your first level manager has a different vision or a different leadership style, right? And that's going to be an issue. And so we need to think about that when we start talking about organizations and people. We also have to think about the people and updating their skills and competencies like I talked about before. How we're going to communicate and collaborate with our people on our team and outside of our team. How we're going to share the knowledge and share all of our specializations. And then we also want to think about how we're going to facilitate value creation. Because at the end of the day, the whole thing about culture and organizations and people is to be able to do something, right? Creating that product, creating that service, which gives value to that consumer. And if we can't create value for our consumer, we're not going to be in business very long. So that's why we have to think about this. When we think about products and services, the first dimension we think about it from is through the lens of the organization and the people. How are we going to set up the organization? How is it going to function? What kind of culture it's going to have? And how do we take care of the people so that the people can deliver those products and services? Information and technology. It's our second dimension. And when we talk about these dimensions, it's the perspective that we're looking at those products and services through so we can co-create that value for our consumers. And so when we look at it from information technology, these are two different things. We have the information and we have the technology that we're going to hold the information in. Let's start with technologies because that's the one that's probably easier to understand. When we talk about technology, this is all the things that an information technology specialist is going to deal with on a daily basis. That's the servers, the mobile phones, the laptops, the desktops, the routers, the switches, all of that stuff. But when we talk about technology, it's really split up into two different things. There's technologies that are going to support the IT service, and there's technologies that are going to support the IT service management. Notice there's a difference there. Now, when I talk about the IT services, let's say that you're Uber, okay? You're going to be a ride-sharing service. What technologies do you need to provide your service? Well, you have to have a website, you have to have an app, you need to have servers and infrastructure, you need to have applications and communication systems, maybe some artificial intelligence to send the right driver to the right location. You might be using cloud computing and cognitive computing. You might even be using blockchain if you're accepting Bitcoin for payment. All of that stuff is the stuff that we need to do to get that service in the hands of your consumer. Now, on the other side of things, we have technologies that support service management. And when we're talking about technology supporting IT service management, we're talking about the things that allow the business to do its function. That's things like workflow management. It might be your customer service tools. It might be remote collaboration so that you can log into those IT services, those servers and cloud services, to go in and configure them. It might be things like mobile platforms or inventory systems so you can figure out where all your spare parts are. All the things that aren't going to necessarily deliver the service to the end user, but are things the business needs anyway. For example, you might have an intranet SharePoint site that serves as your knowledge base, and if so, that would be a supporting IT service management technology, not an IT services technology. Now, some of these technologies will be the same. You might be using cloud computing in both areas. You might be using artificial intelligence in both areas, but there is that difference there. There's those things that are supporting the end user, those IT services, and then those things that are supporting your internal staff so they can support your end user, and those things are going to be the IT service management technologies. So that's the technology side of things. Now, let's consider the information side of things as we look at our products and services. For some of our services, information management is probably the primary means of enabling that customer value. For example, if you're a newspaper that's online, what are you delivering to your customers? You're delivering information. And so information management is critical to that. You might be a data analytics company and you're providing data analysis and the result of that data analysis as information. And so if that's the case, information is very important to you. So information management has lots of different challenges though, because when we talk about information, there's all these different things we need to make sure are there so the information can get to where it needs to be to add that value. That's things like ensuring that we have availability of the information, reliability of the information, accessibility of the information. The information needs to be timely, it needs to be accurate, and it needs to be relevant. All of these are factors that we judge information by. And if we can get all those 6 factors, we probably have some highly valuable information. But to maintain all of those is a challenge and it's difficult. And so to be able to do that, we have to make sure that we're providing good security for it and good IT services that underlie those informations. We need to make sure we're meeting all the regulatory compliance requirements and the legal requirements. All of this is things that we have to consider when we think about the information dimension or that perspective as we look at building out our products and services. So when we look at this and we look at information and technology, what are some of the considerations we should be thinking of? Well, we should be thinking of, is this compatible with the current architecture? Is this going to work with the technology we're already using? Does it raise any kind of regulatory, legal, compliance, or information security control issues? If I start holding a lot of people's personal information, how am I going to protect it, for instance? Because there's laws that say I have to protect it. The next thing is, will it continue to be viable in the foreseeable future? If I'm going to invest a lot of money into moving to this new server, is this going to be good for the next 3 to 5 years? Or is this something that's only going to be good for 3 months? If it's not good for the foreseeable future, we may want to rethink it. When we think about a new technology, is it going to align with the service provider or the service consumer strategy? We have to have a strategy of where we're going. For example, in my company, we have a strategy of what type of courses we want to teach. So even though I can teach probably 50 or 100 different courses, there's only about 20 or 30 courses that we have in our portfolio. And the reason is that aligns with our strategy where some of the other things don't. And when you think about this from your business, you have to think about what's in line with your strategy and what isn't. If you're a computer company, you probably want to be doing things that build computers. You don't want to start doing healthcare services. It doesn't align with your brand. Next, we're going to think about, does the organization have the right skills to support and maintain the technology? For example, if you're going to move all your stuff to the cloud, do you have people who know how to run Azure and AWS? Because those are skills you're going to need, and running cloud servers is different than running your own server farm. The next consideration we have to think about is it going to have enough automation capabilities that you can develop it and deploy it and operate it with less people in the future? Because we're always trying to minimize our overhead and lower our costs. Anything that can be automated, we probably want to automate it. Another thing we want to think about is, does it have additional capabilities that we can leverage for other products and services? This is an interesting one. If you think about this, this is actually how Amazon Web Services started. Amazon had to start building large server farms so that they can start selling more product as Amazon.com. But as they did that, they built up a lot of capability, and they go, oh wait, I bet other businesses would like to have this capability too. And they started selling it as AWS or Amazon Web Services. Maybe that might apply to your business as well. As you're doing some kind of new capability, you're going to buy something for one capability, but it brings you other capabilities. And that now may add to your product or service line, just like Amazon did with AWS. And finally, we want to think about, does this new technology introduce new risks or new constraints to your organization? So if I'm going to move everything to the cloud, how is that going to work from a data loss prevention strategy? How is that going to work from a regulatory compliance strategy? All of those are things we have to think about in the risk. Now, when we think about risk, that's really going to go back to our last dimension as well. It's going to go back to our organizational culture. Depending on the nature of your organization's business and the culture you have, you may be more or less risk adverse. For example, if you're a small startup out in Silicon Valley, you're probably willing to take a lot of risk. But if you're a big established company, you probably don't want to take a lot of risks. You want to make sure things are stable, accurate, and reliable. And so those things are things you have to consider which technologies you're going to implement. Are you going to get the cutting edge, which is more risky, or are you going to get something that's more stable and tried and true? Again, these are all different considerations to think about. But the bottom line, especially for the exam, is that one of the dimensions we're going to be thinking about when we're building our product or service is based on the information and technology, and figuring out how that information technology is going to impact the service for the long haul. Partners and suppliers. This is our third dimension. Now, partners and suppliers are really organizations and people, but they're not going to fit under dimension one. The reason is, when we talk about organizations and people, we're internally focused. We're looking at our company and our organization and the people that support it. When we talk about partners and suppliers, we're talking about things external to us. Now, the other question that comes up often is, why do I have to call it partners and suppliers? Aren't they one and the same? Well, no. There's a difference between people who are your partners and people who are your suppliers, and we'll talk about that in this lesson. First, let's consider this. There are the service provider and the service consumer, and they have that relationship. We talked about that back in section 2. When we talk about that, there are some people who are consuming something and somebody who is providing that. Now, in our organization, we may be the service provider and we're selling things to our customers, right? Or our consumers. But we're probably also taking things in that we're going to use, and in that case, we're the consumer and somebody else is our service provider. That might be a partner of ours, or it might be a supplier of ours. Now, whether you're going to use a partner or a supplier is going to depend on your organization strategy. You're going to think about, is this something that is critical to our business? And if so, you probably need it more as a partner relationship. If it's something that's not as critical, it might be in the supplier relationship. Well, let me give you an example of this. My company is in partnership with PeopleCert and Excelos. Now, PeopleCert is the people who are going to test you for the Itil 4 exam, and Excelos are the people who write the exam and all of the textbooks. Because of our partnership with them, we get access to the textbooks about 6 months to a year before they're available for students. That gives us time to get them, read them, learn all the information, and then build all the practice exams and the courses for you. Also, we get all the objectives ahead of time. All of this stuff is things that Excelos and PeopleCert provide to us as part of our partnership. And because we are aligned with them in this partnership, we get all of these critical business functions and we get input into them and they get input back to us. That's a partnership. Now, if I look at a supplier relationship, on the other hand, my company has a bunch of printers in our office. Now, if you want to get some paper for the printer or you want to get some ink and toner for the printer, that's a supplier. I'm going to go up on Amazon, I'm going to order some stuff, Amazon's going to drop it on the front door, and we're now going to have paper and toner and staplers and things like that for the company. I don't need to know what Amazon's going to be doing in the next 6 months to be able to make sure that supply order is going to continue to go on. Because if Amazon stops doing printer and toner and ink, I can just pick somebody else to do it. It's a commodity. But if Excelos decided that they were going to turn off the ITIL 4 certification and no longer offer it anymore, that's something that's very critical to our business, and we need to know about it. So that's the difference between this partnership and a supplier relationship. With a partner, you have a lot more buy-in. You have a lot more two-way communication. You might share plans and roadmaps. For example, Excelos has already told us when the next part of the ITIL 4 certification comes out. The foundation is the first level, and then there are 5 other exams that allow you to get up to being an ITIL master. We already have the roadmap and know when those are going to happen, so we can build all of those products to that partnership. With a supplier, I don't know if Amazon's going to change the type of paper they're going to supply next week, but I really don't care. As long as it's 8.5 by 11 and it's white and it goes in the printer, that's fine by me, right? It's a big difference when you're dealing with a partnership versus a supplier. Now, this is going to influence your supplier strategy. You're going to have to think about, do I care about price most? Do I care about quality most? Do I care about being able to exchange that out with different people? Let me give you a couple of examples of this. Let's say you're building your technology and you're going to build a new website. You decide you're going to host it on the cloud. There's 3 major providers for cloud right now. You have Google Cloud, Microsoft Azure, and Amazon's AWS service, the Amazon Web Services. You can use any of those 3. They're all fairly equivalent, right? But you need to understand when you pick one that it's pretty painful to have to move from one to the other. And so you probably want to pick one with a long-term strategy of staying with it. Because once you pick one, you're going to get your staff trained to that certifications. So if I'm going to go with Microsoft, I'm going to get a bunch of my folks Azure qualified. If I go with Amazon, I'm going to get them AWS certified, right? And we're going to build ourselves around that strategy. It's not as easy moving from Azure to AWS as it is to go from HP paper to Boston paper, right? Paper is paper, it still fits in the printer. And so there's a different level of supplier there, but it's still a supplier. You're not going to necessarily have a partnership with AWS where they're going to give you their roadmap for the next 5 years. That's not the level of partnership you have. And so these are going to be some of the different factors that are going to affect whether you're going to be more of a commodity based and look for the lowest price, like you might for ink and toner and paper, or if you're going to be looking at other factors that impact, such as reliability, quality, track record. If I'm going for a web provider, those are things I care about. Or all the way on the other side, we have those partnerships where we're fully involved with the long-term goals and strategies of that organization. Now, the last thing I want to talk about here is this concept of a service integration. Now, with service integration, a lot of times you're going to have a lot of different things out there. If I look at the service that I use to be able to provide my videos to you, I have a video service out there, I have a storefront, I have a website, we have cloud hosting. We've got 5 or 6 different things that we have to tie together to make sure that we deliver the videos to you the way that you want to get them. Now, we do that all internally because we want to make sure it's done right and because it's a reasonable number, 4 or 5 or 6 different services. But if you're in a very large company, you might have a lot of different suppliers. I worked in one organization where we had thousands of different suppliers because we had 100,000 employees. It was a huge organization. And so we didn't want to have to deal with all of those people individually. Instead, we hired a third party called a service integrator, and it was their job to do all of the management of all of those suppliers for us. And so we would pay the integrator, and they would reach out to all of those different organizations and manage those relationships for us and make sure we got the products we needed at the time we needed and the delivery we needed. And so if you're going to integrate in a bunch of different services and a bunch of different suppliers, those service integrators can really be helpful. So to summarize partnerships and suppliers, when we talk about partnerships, this is where you're going to share common goals and risks with the partner. You're going to collaborate to achieve the desired outcomes you want, and you're going to make sure that you're both in it together. So in the example of Excelos and PeopleCert and Dion Training, we're all in it together. If Excelos starts not selling exams because their brand goes down, then employers don't want people to get certified in it, then that hurts my business as well. And so we're all in it together to make sure that the brand stays good, that employers still want it, and that ITIL is still valuable. Now, when we start talking about suppliers, on the other hand, we're talking about goods and service, right? This can be done through formal contracts. There's a clear separation of responsibilities. I pay X amount of dollars and I get X amount of bandwidth, or I get X amount of cloud space, or I get X amount of reams of paper. Whatever those things are, that's all handled through contracting, and it's a deliverable. I pay you for this, you do this amount of work. When you outsource a function, that's considered a supplier, not a partnership. Now, every organization and every service is going to depend on some extent on other organizations, whether they're partners or suppliers. There is nothing you can do that you're doing without any other partners out there. Something out there is doing it. That might be that you have a supplier like Microsoft that provides you Microsoft Office when you pay a fee. It might be your internet service provider who you're paying a monthly fee to get online to do your business. Whatever it is, there is something out there that is part of this partners and suppliers. And a lot of times there are a lot of these somethings, which is service integration and management. Service integration and management involves the use of specially established integrators to ensure that the service relationships are properly coordinated. Now, what does that mean? Well, if you think about it, there's a lot of different moving pieces here. If I go and look at my website, for example, I have the website that has to be coded by a programmer. I have the graphics that need to be added on by a graphic designer. I have somebody who needs to host this with a web server. I have the videos hosted on a different video server. I have somebody who does the credit card processing. We've got 5 or 6 or 7 different suppliers involved just to be able to run a simple e-commerce website, and probably more than that if I started listing them all out. Well, we can either do the service integration internal to the organization, meaning that I can go and work with all of these individual vendors to make sure the product works properly, or I can outsource that to a service integration and management person. And if I hire a service integrator, they'll do all of that for me. So I can contract to them, they can then go out to all of those third-party vendors, get it all working, and then just bring me back the result I want. In that case, they become a service provider to me, doing service integration, and I become the service consumer, consuming the service that I have just outsourced to them. Now, should you use a service integrator? Well, that depends on your organization's strategy. Your strategy when it comes to partners and suppliers and integrators is all going to be based on your goals, your culture, and your business environment. There's a lot of different things going on out there, and figuring out what your supplier strategy is something that's going to help. For the exam though, you just need to remember that we have partners and suppliers. Partners are more closely tied into our business. Suppliers tend to be more commoditized things. And if you can keep that straight, you'll do great on the exam. Our fourth and final dimension is value streams and processes. Value streams and processes are going to define the activities, the workflows, the controls, and the procedures that are needed to achieve the agreed upon objectives. These are things like the activities that the organization is going to undertake, how those activities are organized, and how value creation is ensured for all of your stakeholders efficiently and effectively. Now, when we talk about this, let's start with value stream. A value stream is a series of steps that an organization undertakes to create and deliver products and services to its service consumers. This is going to combine all of the organization's value chain activities. And we're going to spend a lot of time talking about value chain activities. In fact, we have an entire section on it. So let me give you an example of a value stream. A value stream is going to have a series of steps, right? So let me give you 3 steps. I want to go and have lunch today. So I'm going to go drive to a fast food restaurant. I'm going to go walk inside and I'm going to go up to the front and I'm going to order a hamburger and fries. That's step 1, the order process. Then I get to step 2, which is I'm going to wait while they cook my food. And then step 3, they're going to deliver that food to me and I can eat it. That is a value where we're going to have a transformation from the raw materials. We're going to get the order, take the raw materials, make this burger, and then deliver it back to Jason so Jason can have his lunch. That's a value stream of 3 steps. There's activities in there that are going to add to the value of this, such as when they cook the hamburger and they put on the ketchup and the mustard and then they deliver it to me at my table. That's all value added. It gives me value and that's why I'm paying for it. But there's some things that are not value added. For example, when they're cooking the fries, there's waste oil that happens. That's actually considered waste. They have to throw that away and pay to get rid of that. That is a non-value adding activity. There's also things like when they get the packaging with all the hamburgers and they have to throw away that package. That's waste as well. When I leave the table and I leave my burger and fries and make a mess, that's a non-value adding activity for the organization because they have to spend time and money to go clean up that mess, right? In everything we do, there's things that add value and there's waste. And in business, we always try to minimize the waste and increase the value. So that's a basic example of some value stream activities, right? We have these 3 steps. We're going to order it, we're going to manufacture it, we're going to deliver it, and those are value adding activities. But there's also those waste activities, those non-value adds as well. What we want to do is we want to optimize the value stream so we can minimize the amount of non-value adding activities while increasing the amount of value adding activities. Once we do that and we get it right, we then want to automate that process as much as possible. So I was talking about ordering hamburgers for lunch. Well, if you've gone into a McDonald's recently, a lot of them are moving to automation. They're eliminating the order taking process and getting rid of the cashiers. And instead, they have these giant tablets that look like giant iPads, and you go in there and you order your food there and you pay with your credit card. It completely eliminated what they consider to be non-value adding activity, having a cashier take your order. Now they're passing that work on to you as the consumer, and they're focusing on cooking the food and handing it to you. That's the idea here with optimization and automation. Now, when we look at these processes, what exactly is a process? Well, it's simply a set of interrelated or interacting activities that transforms some input into an output. Processes are designed to achieve a specific objective. In my example, we had a value stream that was made up of one process with 3 different activities: the ordering, the manufacture, and the delivery. And they achieved a specific objective. That objective, getting Jason his lunch, right? And that's the idea of the process. Input, some amount of activities, and then an output. And by well defining your processes, you can improve your productivity, and then you can also get it optimized so you can automate it as much as possible. And this is why we have our value streams and processes together in this dimension. Because as we're looking at our products and services, we're going to ask ourselves some questions. We're going to say, what is the generic delivery model for this service? What are the steps that we need to do to make this service work? Basically, what's the processes, and which set of processes, when we put them together, gives us the right value stream? What are the value streams that are going to be involved in delivering the agreed upon outputs of the service? So if I think about giving you video delivery of this course, there's a lot of different things that have to occur. And we break those down into what the value stream is, and then each of those pieces, those steps, are the processes inside of it. We have to think about who and what is going to perform each of those required service actions. Again, breaking it down into the individual processes so we can figure that out. And that's why this is considered our 4th dimension, as we're looking at this and figuring out how are we going to give you that product or that service by doing some processes as part of a value stream. In this lesson, we're going to discuss the pestle model. Now, before we do, I want to point out that this part is not going to be on the exam. The only reason I'm bringing it up is because you may have been asking yourself back in the introduction to the section, why do we have these external factors around the outside of our 4 dimensions? We have the value in the center, and then around that we had the products and services. We had our 4 dimensions that are the 4 perspectives we look at our services, but there is these external factors circling around the outside, and that's what I want to discuss here. These are known as the pestle model, which is a generic open source model that stands for the acronym of PESTLE, P for political, E for economic, S for social, T for technological, L for legal, and E for environmental. Now, these are 6 things that are outside of your organization that you can't control. They're going to happen to you, but they are external factors that you have to think about when you're designing a service or a product. Now, these are the things that are outside your control, right? So let's think about one of a great example. I've used this example a lot throughout this course, but the example of Uber or Lyft, those ride-sharing services. When they first came out, they were a completely different model, and so there was a social component of it. Would people be willing to embrace this idea that they could get into a stranger's car by summoning them with their app? They could come up and you get in their car and they drive you to your destination, as opposed to using a traditional taxi. That's a different socio-dynamic than we're used to. And so that was something that people were worried about. They couldn't really control that as Uber. They had to just hopefully get enough people to change their minds in society that it became commonplace. And now most of us don't think twice about taking an Uber, do we? Another one might be technological. Maybe you're facing some challenges as you're trying to figure out how to build your service that you don't have the right technology to do it because that technology doesn't exist yet. For example, maybe you want to make sure you have this ultra-safe encryption, and so you want to design it with quantum-resistant technology, but quantum computers don't exist yet, so you can't quite do that. And when quantum computers do come out, all of the existing technology and encryption we're using is going to be considered obsolete. And so that's a technological impact external to our environment that we really can't control. There's also legal impacts. I'll go back to the Uber example. There are cities and there are countries that have actually made it illegal for Uber to operate there. They said that you have to have a taxi license to be able to run a taxi type service, and therefore Uber cannot be run there. And they have pushed Uber out of those communities. That's a legal restriction that they can't get through until they can get that law changed. How do you get a law changed? Well, you try to get some political pressure, right? And so maybe you're going to have to put some effort and lobbying into changing the minds of the political culture so they can change the law and make it so it's acceptable for you to run your service in those areas. All of these things are things that are going to affect us. That's the pestle, the political, the economic, the social, the technological, the legal, and the environmental. Again, for the exam, you don't have to memorize these 6. It's just something for you to think about as you're considering your services and you're building them, because it is something that may impact you depending on the choices you make. So now that we've covered all 4 dimensions and the external factors throughout this section, I want to put it all together in a real-world example to really drive the point home of how these all work together. So we talked about our 4 dimensions: organizations and people, information and technology, partners and suppliers, and value streams and processes, as well as those 6 external factors that all are focused in and how we look at our products and services to co-create value with our consumers. Well, let's consider the process of incident management. How are we going to deal with incident management when something happens to our service or our product? Well, if we look at it through the organizations and people lens, or that dimension, we're going to ask the question of how we're going to organize our teams. Is this something the service desk is going to handle? Are we going to have different tiers like tier 1, tier 2, tier 3 support? Or are we going to have a flat organization? These are all things we have to figure out. How are we going to organize our communications? How is that tier 1 representative going to transfer the information they collected to the tier 2 representative if you're going to use a tiered or vertical organization? How are you going to escalate it up to the next level? At which trip points? Well, how about the people you need? How are you going to decide how many people you need to run the incident management for a particular service? What competencies do they need? Is this service going to be something that uses AWS, so you need Amazon Web Service certified people? Or is this going to be something where we're going to use local services? How about the qualifications? How about the way they're going to interact? How are you going to motivate the people? How are you going to hire the right people? How are you going to keep the right people? How are you going to pay them? And how are you going to make sure that they're capable of doing the incident management that you want them to do? All of these are things you have to think about from the organizations and people lens, or perspective, or dimension. Now, when I look at it from the information technology side, let's think about it from the process standpoint. How am I going to register the incident? Am I writing it down on a piece of paper? Am I putting it in an intranet portal? Am I using a certain piece of software or hardware to do that? How about the relationships between incidents? How do I know that this incident with this printer that happened today is related or not related to the one that happened 3 weeks ago? Well, maybe I have some kind of technology or information management software that does that for me, that can track the incidents and the problems, or the incidents and the particular configuration item, meaning that printer, or the incidents and the different users who are being affected. Maybe when we get all these calls and we put them together, we find that all of the users affected all reside in building 1 and not in building 2. So maybe it's a problem with building 1. And so we can look into that, right? How about incident management tools for information flow? How are we going to do workflow? How are we going to use knowledge bases? How about diagnostic tools? How are we going to detect these events and process these events? How are we going to communicate with each other? How are we going to organize and share data? All of this is stuff that goes under that information part of the information and technology portion of this dimension. Then we get to our 3rd dimension, and we start looking at our partners and suppliers, right? It's because nobody is self-sufficient. We talked about this before. Maybe this printer is broken because it ran out of supplies. There's no more paper. There's no more toner, right? So those are things we'd have to think about. When we think about partners and suppliers, we have to think about the external teams that are going to contribute to the success of our service. Maybe in this case, we have outsourced completely the management of the printers, and that company isn't doing a good job, and so we need to evaluate their contract. If we outsource a service, how are we going to escalate incidents to them once something is broken? Or maybe we escalate top tier service, so we handle minor incidents in-house, but we're going to outsource those major incidents, and so we have to escalate it to them. How do we get information back from them when they fix something, right? Two-way street between partners and suppliers and us. All of this is things that we have to think about when we start considering how we're going to operate with our partners and our suppliers, right? And then we have our final dimension to look at, which is going to be our value stream and our processes. Maybe we look at that value stream and see that this whole process of printing actually has issues with it because it's not optimized properly. There's too much waste in it. Maybe we've looked at it and we said, you know what, we can take out step number 2 and just make it step 1, 3, and 4, and that will solve the problem. All those things are things that we would evaluate as we look at it from the 4 dimensions. And then finally, we might want to look at it from those external perspectives. One of those, the E, stood for environmental. Maybe we have somebody who doesn't like the fact that we're printing and wasting a bunch of trees by printing out a lot of stuff. And so somebody might have jammed the printer on purpose to break it because they are an environmentalist, right? That's kind of crazy, but you kind of get the idea of what I'm talking about. We can start thinking about all of these 4 dimensions and these external factors and how they're going to affect a simple service, something like printing or something like an incident management. And as we look at this, that's how all of this ends up tying together. And that's the whole idea of using these 4 dimensions. When you're thinking about your processes, your people, your organization, your technology, your information, all of that stuff, so that you can make sure that your products and services are delivering the value they're supposed to. The service value system. In this section of the course, we're going to briefly describe the service value system. Now, this ties back to one of the objectives on the exam, which is to describe the service value system. So for the exam, you need to make sure you understand what the service value system is and the components that make up this service value system. So let's start with what is the service value system. Well, the service value system, or the SVS, is going to describe how all of the components and activities of your organization work together as a system to enable value co-creation. Now, these components and activities are all tied together within the organization's resources, and they can be configured and reconfigured in multiple different combinations in this flexible way based on the circumstances. Now, this is going to require some integration and coordination of all of the different activities and practices and teams within the organization, as well as different authorities and responsibilities for this to truly be effective. Some organizations are much more flexible than others. Some are very tight and stringent in their ways. But depending on your organization and its culture, you're going to be able to utilize this service value system in a very rigid or very flexible manner. It just depends on your organization and how you implement it. Now, the purpose of this service value system is to ensure that your organization is continually co-creating value with all of your stakeholders through the use and management of the products and services that you have within your organization. Now, when we look at this service value system, it's made up of 3 basic blocks that we're going to see. You'll see on the left side we have opportunity and demand. That's our input. We have on the right side value. That's our output. And then we have all this stuff in the middle. In the middle we have the service value chain, and we're going to dedicate an entire section of this course to talking about the service value chain. Around that service value chain we also have governance and practices. We're going to talk a lot about practices in their own section of this course, which is the final 3 sections, because there are 34 different practices inside of Itil 4 that we're going to cover. And then we have governance, which is the way the organization is run. We talked a little bit about governance before, and we're going to revisit that in this section. And then we have the guiding principles and continual improvement. And again, the guiding principles is a big concept, so we're going to spend an entire section on that as well. So before we go any further, I just want to say welcome to the service value system, and we're going to start focusing on opportunity and demand and value, those inputs and outputs, in the next lesson. Opportunities, demand, and value. When we consider the service value system, it's going to take some inputs, which come from opportunities and demands, do a bunch of processes, activities using the guiding principles, the governance, and continual improvement to eventually give us an output, which we hope is value that we can share with our consumers and our customers. Now, when we look at those inputs, the first one we have is opportunities. Opportunities represent options or possibilities to add value for stakeholders or otherwise improve the organization. Now, some examples of this is if we're going to find new markets or find new customers. We might create a new service or create a new product. There's lots of different ways for us to figure out what those opportunities are and then bring those to market so we can help add value. For example, when I first started teaching Itil, I didn't have the ability as a partner to be able to sell vouchers to my students. And so my students, when they finished taking my course, would go to PeopleCert or they would go to Pearson VUE and they would order their voucher and pay for their exam directly there and then take the exam. The problem with that is that made them have to pay full retail price. Now, one of the things we've done is we've been able to partner with PeopleCert and partner with Excelos so we can get those vouchers and buy them in bulk so we can buy a lot of them and pay a much lower price and pass the savings on to our students. So now our students can come to our website, buy those vouchers, and save about $50 off the retail price because they're buying it through us. It was a way that we were able to give our customers more value by offering a product. It wasn't necessarily a service because it's not something that we were doing. We're just buying them in bulk and then reselling them to you and passing those savings on to you. But it added value for our students because now they can buy their training and their certification exams through us at a much cheaper rate. That was an opportunity we saw, and we decided to take it. And so we built different processes in place and practices to make that a reality so you can get your vouchers that way. Now, the other input we have is demand. And demand is when there is need or desire for products and services among your internal or external consumers. Now, what does this look like? Well, I get this on a daily basis in our company. I have students who finish an exam and they send me an email and say, hey, I passed this exam. Do you offer this new other certification? Or I would love it if you offered this certification. And so they have a demand, an external consumer who wants something from our company and they're telling us about it. Hey, I passed Itil and I want to take Prince 2. Do you offer that? Well, because enough students asked us to, we went and did a Prince 2 course, and we offer that now. And so we do take input from our students, and that helps us shape what products and services we're going to do. One of the things students have asked a lot for is they want more hands-on practice in our IT certification courses. So we're building labs where students can log in and do actual actions instead of just watching it on video. Those are the kind of things that demand has fed, and now we have put that through our service value system and through our service value chain to create products and services that can come out the other side and give value to our students. Which brings us to the outcome of the service value system, which is the value. That's the output, right? The output or the outcome. And when we look at that, the service value system is going to enable the creation of many different types of value for a wide group of stakeholders. So when I think about value, and I look at it from a service perspective, there is a value that we as an organization get. So for example, when we talk about the exam vouchers, well, there's a value that we get from doing that. By buying those all and doing all the processing, we do keep a little bit of money and we make a little bit of profit off of that. So there's value for my company in doing that. Because again, we have to pay our employees and we have to make some overhead to do that. There's also value for our other stakeholders, our students. Instead of paying full retail price, you get $50 off. And so that saves you money and it gives you the thing you need, right? We're giving you value there. We might have value from other organizations. I actually have some deals with some colleges, and when they go through and they teach their students Itil 4, they want to be able to buy those vouchers as well. But they don't buy it in the same bulk we do because we buy thousands and tens of thousands of these vouchers a year. And so we get a much lower price. And so we actually sell those vouchers, some of those, to these colleges for their students in groups of 20 or 50, and they get a little bit of a lower price than you as an individual student do because they are buying so many of them, right? And so again, we have value for a bunch of different stakeholders here with the same exact product or service. Because the way that the service value system works, that can happen, right? Amazon built an entire server farm to house their website, and then they go, I bet we can sell this to other companies too. And they do. It's called Amazon Web Services, right? And that means they can take that and give different value to different stakeholders. That's the idea. So we look at this service value system from left to right. We're looking at inputs of opportunities, what new markets, new customers, new services, and new products can you have, as well as demand, what things do these people want to buy, internally or externally. And then on the output side, we have value for those internal and those external consumers, for the business, for the organization, for all of your customers and all of your consumers. That's the idea of the service value system. Take something in, add value, and put it out the other side. Governance. In this lesson, we're going to briefly revisit the concept of governance. And you see it here inside the service value system. It's going to be part of that internal piece that takes our opportunities and our demands, works it through that middle of the service value system to come out the other side as value. Now, what is governance? Well, governance is the means by which an organization is directed and controlled. I used the example earlier. If you think about your government, like the US Congress, they do governance. They provide the laws and regulations that the rest of the company will follow. Well, inside of your organization, you run governance as well. Governance may be set up by those in the C-suite, your CEO, your CFO, your CIO, your CSO, or other high-level executives. You're going to come up with the way the organization is going to be directed and controlled, and then pass that down through governance down to things like guidelines and regulations and standards. Itil, at its core, is a framework for governance. but it's not a directive framework for governance. It's not going to tell you you have to follow everything the way that Itil says it is. Itil instead is a best practice, and you can write your governance based on Itil. Now, when we look at governance at a large macro level in your organization, it's the way you're going to do things. You may come up with processes and activities and procedures for how you're going to handle something like change management. Every time you want to have a new server installed, it's got to go through this process that has 15 different steps and these many different approvals at this level. That is part of governance, the way you're going to control and organize and direct your organization. That's the whole concept. So if you think about governance like laws, but within your organization, that's kind of the big concept of it. And it is part of this service value system because that governance is what you're going to build your processes and your activities around to make sure they're in line with the governance system put out at that high level of your organization. The guiding principles. In this section of the course, we're going to take a look at the 7 guiding principles in Itil 4. Now, this is important because on the exam, there are 2 exam objectives that are going to cover these 7 guiding principles. The first is to describe the nature, use, and interaction of these 7 guiding principles. And the second objective is to explain the use of these 7 different guiding principles. And this is important because we're not going to have to memorize those guiding principles necessarily or figure out what their definition is, but we're actually going to have to explain and describe, which is a level 2 level of effort inside the exam. So if I give you a scenario and I explain what one of these guiding principles is, you should be able to pick out and say, this guiding principle relates to that scenario. Now, before we go and dig into all of that, we have to go and think about what is a guiding principle. Well, a guiding principle is a recommendation that's going to guide an organization in all circumstances. That's right, guiding principles can be used to guide an organization in their work as they adopt a service management approach and adapt Itil guidance to their own specific needs and circumstances. This means that all organizations are going to integrate the use of multiple different methods into their overall approach to service management. The way you do service management and the way I do service management might be different, but we both should be based on the same guiding principles because these guiding principles are applied universally to every initiative out there. Now, when we talk about applying those guiding principles, these guiding principles are going to help us to encourage and support our organizations in their continual improvement across all levels of the organization. These, as I said, are applied universally to all of the initiatives, but also to all of the relationships with your different stakeholder groups. So as we talk about the consumers and the customers and the stakeholders across our organization, all of these people need to be considered when you're thinking about these guiding principles. For example, the first guiding principle is known as focus on value. Now, with focus on value, it can and should be applied to all of your relevant stakeholders and respective definitions of value. We're not going to just consider the value for the consumer, but we also want to look at it from the value for the customer. We want to look at it for the value for the service provider. All of those different people and stakeholders need to be getting value from whatever the services we're doing. And so that's the way that we look at this stuff, for example, as we're looking at the focus on value principle. Now, as an organization, I'm not going to use just 1 or 2 of these principles, but I should consider all 7 of them and determine which ones are relevant for each situation and how I should apply them. Not all of the principles are going to be critical in every situation, but you're probably going to find that 5 or 6 or even 7 of them may apply to your initiative. And so you want to think through each of them kind of like a checklist to make sure you're thinking about your service in a holistic way. As you do this and you review each of them, you have a way to determine whether or not they're appropriate for your service and should it be applied. Now, I mentioned a lot about these guiding principles so far, but I haven't even told you what they are. Well, throughout the rest of this section, we're going to focus on the 7 guiding principles. The first is focus on value. The second is start where you are. The third is progress iteratively and with feedback. The fourth is to collaborate and promote visibility. The fifth is to think and work holistically. The sixth is to keep it simple and practical. And finally, our 7th one is to optimize and automate. So let's get started looking at our 7 guiding principles. Focus on value. Focus on value is our first guiding principle. It states that everything the organization does should link back directly or indirectly to value for itself, its customers, and its stakeholders. Now, how do we apply this focus on value? Well, there's really a four-step method that I like to use when I think about focusing on value. First, I want to understand and identify the service consumer. Who is it that I'm trying to serve? Because if you remember from value, we're trying to co-create value between the service provider and the service consumer. Now, once I identify who that service consumer is and how they plan on using my service, I can then understand the consumer's perspective of value. For example, if my service consumer is a student who wants to be able to watch videos to learn how to pass the Itil 4 exam, then I need to understand how you plan on consuming that. Are you planning on sitting at your desktop all day, or are you going to be on a mobile device? And if you're on a mobile device, do you have enough data to be able to stream the videos? Or do you want to be able to download the data and be able to download all those videos ahead of time? These are all things that we have to consider as we're building out our service and how we can best support and provide value to our service consumers. Then I want to map the value to the intended outcomes, and those intended outcomes may change over time. I used the example before of this exam. You're taking this course so you can pass an exam. Now, once you've passed the exam, you may go back and watch these videos again, but now you have a completely different perspective and desired outcome because you're not trying to pass the exam, you've already done that. Instead, you're trying to go back and review and get smarter in certain areas so you may be able to take that and apply it inside your organization. So those give us two distinctly different outcomes. One is a set of students who are watching the videos to pass the exam. Another set is students who are watching the videos to get better at their job and be able to apply Itil 4 inside their organizations. That brings us to our fourth step. And the fourth thing I look at is to understand the customer experience and the user experience. Now, this goes back to, again, how does that customer use your service? What are they trying to achieve in it? And are you doing it the best way possible for them? For example, we might decide to make a mobile app that will allow you to take all of your videos on the go on your iPhone or your Android. That might work well if a lot of my customers consume our content through a mobile device. But if we find that most of our consumers are consuming that content by sitting at a desktop or a laptop, then spending money to build an Android or an iPhone app is not going to be worthwhile, right? And so there's not a lot of value there. So that's the idea as we go through those four steps. Now, when we look at application, there's a couple of key factors. You want to know how your customers are going to use each service. You also want to encourage a focus on value among your entire staff, because as your company and organization grows, you're going to have different people servicing your consumers. That might be tech support, it might be customer service agents, it might be sales agents, it might be business managers, whatever it is. The entire staff needs to know what that value is that we're trying to get to our consumers, and then we can push that across the entire staff as our leading vision. Also, when we focus on value, we want to do this during operational activity as well as during our improvement initiatives. Focusing on value is done every single day across the entire service, whether it's to make it work today or how we can improve it to make it better tomorrow. And finally, I want to make sure that you're thinking about creating a focus on value in every step of any improvement initiative. If I decide to go back and refilm this course, I need to figure out what parts need to be improved upon. And I do that by thinking about the value it's going to create for my consumer, my students. If I'm going to go back and re-record this lecture, I need to be adding something new to it that makes it better and helps you understand the concepts better and allows you to get more value out of it. That's the idea. Everything we do is focused on value, both for our consumer as well as for us, the service provider. Start where you are. Our second guiding principle is to start where you are. This is a really important guiding principle because whenever you get into an organization, even if you're a brand new hire, they already have existing processes and services in place. And if you're brought on board to help improve that through an improvement initiative, you have to remember that we don't want to start with a blank slate each time. We want to start where we are. And so if I had you come in and I hired you to figure out the best way to create a new service or process to do voucher fulfillment for my students, every time somebody comes to our website to buy an exam voucher, you would have to look at the way the current process is done. And then you can figure out what is the better way to do it, right? But if you don't start with where we currently are and you just start from a blank slate, you're going to spend a lot of time and resources doing stuff that isn't the way that we currently do it, right? And there's probably some amount of value in the way we currently do it. And so whenever you're engaged in an improvement initiative, I don't want you to start over without first looking at what is already available to be leveraged, because something there is probably valuable. Now, when you have a decision on how to proceed, you have to think about this based on the accurate information that's obtained through your direct observation, supported by appropriate and effective measurement. So again, if I have you come in, you're going to look at the way we currently do voucher fulfillment. If you looked at us about a year ago, the way we did it was a student would buy it through our shopping cart on our website. That would send an email to me. I would then go and order the voucher, take that voucher, put it in an email, and email it back to the student. It was a very manual process. Now, if you came in and looked at that, you'd say, hey, I can make this a lot better. I can automate this. We can do 5 or 6 different ways of doing this process. But if you looked at the way we were doing it, you'd at least know what the proper steps that needed to be included, which was we had to buy the voucher from Excelos, we then had to give that voucher to our student, and we had to collect money from our students for that voucher. So we'd have to figure out what those steps are. By figuring out what the current steps are and how fast it is or how slow it is or what pain points there are, you can then overcome them as you're trying to go forward. And some of those parts of starting where you are useful. Some of those you're going to decide aren't useful and you'll push them away. All of this is done by measuring what you have, and measurements should be used to support your analysis of what you're observing rather than just simply replacing it. Not everything can be measured with zeros and ones and numbers. Some things in data analytics we rely on way too much, and we oversee some of the basic things that we should be observing with our own eyes. Again, if you came in and looked at our voucher process, it was very simple, right? But that worked when we started out because we were selling maybe 2 vouchers a week. Now, we're selling a lot of vouchers a week, and if we had to do that all manually, it wouldn't work. The timeline to deliver to our students would take way too long. So instead, we've looked at that using measurement. We've gotten our time down, where now we deliver a voucher in about 5 minutes, and a lot of it is automated. And now there's still some parts of the process that are still manual, but that's just because of the way that those systems operate. And we're going through and we're constantly improving that to reduce that time down to give a better value and experience for our customers. Now, the act of measuring can affect your results. And this is something that's important to think about, because as you go through and you try to measure everything that's currently going on, sometimes the people you're measuring will change the way they're working because they know they're being watched. This happens a lot inside the service desk area. If you're doing something like measuring how quickly a call is resolved, what you'll start seeing is that your first level agents will close out trouble tickets even before things are solved for your consumers. That means that your measurement is going to go up saying, oh, look how quickly we've been able to resolve all these calls. But in reality, your customers aren't getting the value they want because their calls aren't being resolved. I've seen this even at some places like drive-through restaurants. If you've ever gone through like a McDonald's, they have a counter and they have a measurement of 30 seconds to deliver the food to you in your car to get you on the road again. But if they can't get that, what do? They tell you to pull off to a parking spot so they can mark your order as complete, and that way their timer stops even though you still haven't gotten your food, and that way they can help the next person. And you may be sitting there for 10 minutes to get your food. Because they know they're being measured, that's going to affect the results because they're going to cheat the system. Now, when you set measurements, another thing I want you to think about is that when the measurement becomes a target, it ceases to be a good measure. Going back to that McDonald's example, if I say every car has to get their food within 30 seconds and that becomes the target, we're no longer trying to give good food or good value to the customer. Instead, we're just trying to get them in and out within 30 seconds. So that is something you have to be wary of. Measurement is great in business. We use measurement a lot. But you want to make sure you're measuring the right things and it's not the target in and of itself. You're measuring things to determine if you're making progress towards the outcome that you really want. We talked about that before when we talked about measuring outputs versus measuring outcomes. This is an important concept to remember. So when we talk about starting where you are, how do we really apply this guiding principle? Well, first, I want you to look at what exists as objectively as possible. You may come into a new place and they say, you're going to come in because our current service management system sucks. It's bad, it's horrible, so we're hiring you as the new manager, come in and overhaul the place. You may come in and your first thing you want to do is just delete everything they have and start over. Please resist that urge. Instead, look at what is there, figure out what is useful and what you can build upon. You can determine if there are successful practices or services in place that can be replicated or expanded across the organization, and you can determine the things that are not successful and those things that need to be changed or deleted or removed. You want to be applying your risk management skills here in your decision-making progress, because if we decide to just throw everything away and start from the beginning, we're going to spend a lot more time and assume a lot more risk because it is a lot easier to fix something than it is to create something new. Also, you should recognize that sometimes nothing from the current state can be reused, and you are going to simply have to create a blank slate. Now, when you're going to do that, you're going to have to think about the way to make that transition happen. So a good example of that is my current website. As we're filming this video, we're actually going through a major website redesign and overhaul. And it's not just a redesign of the website itself and how it looks and feels, but all of the underlying services are being rebuilt from the ground up. The current provider we were on was great when we had just a couple of hundred students. But as we've grown, they can't support the demand anymore, and their processes just don't work well for the long-term vision of our company. So instead, we're building a brand new system from the ground up. We have a brand new operating system, brand new servers, a brand new cloud provider, and we've built the entire application layer that does the course delivery ourselves. All of that means we've taken a huge amount of risk because we're migrating from something that we know works into something that we're trying to make work, right? And so because of that, we have to use proper risk management and do mitigations. One of those is we broke up the phased deployment of moving things over in pieces. So as we brought up the new site, we brought over the home page first, but we didn't bring over the shopping cart and we didn't bring over the content and lesson delivery. Next, we're bringing over the shopping cart pieces, making sure that all works. And then we're going to bring over the big bulk, which is our learning management system. We're doing this over a 2 or a 3 month period in very deliberate phased approaches. And by the time we're done, most of what we had on the old site is not going to be reused. It's going to be thrown away because a lot of that doesn't apply on the new systems and the new services we've built. And so that sometimes is where you're going to be. But I would implore to you, always think about what can be reused from the current system to the old system. In our case, a lot of our old training was able to be brought over. Our practice exams were able to be brought over. Our PDFs and our videos were able to be brought over. So we didn't have to recreate 20 classes again. But a lot of the services and the support that underlaid that system is being rebuilt again from a blank slate because that could not be reused. As you go through your organizations, you need to think about what can I reuse when I start from where I am and what do I need to start over on. That's the guiding principle that we use as our second guiding principle. Progress iteratively and with feedback. This is our third guiding principle. Now, what this tells us is that if we work in a time box, iterative manner, getting feedback loops embedded into this process, it's going to allow us to have greater flexibility, much faster responses to our current customer and business needs, as well as the ability to discover and respond to our failures earlier and improve our overall quality. This is all about doing things in an agile method of working. When we go into project management, there's 2 basic ways we can build something. We can do it in a waterfall method, which is more like a standard Prince2 methodology, or we can do it in an agile way of working, which is more like a Prince2 agile methodology. Now, with a waterfall, I want to figure out the entire thing I need, break it down into smaller chunks, and then build each of those chunks towards that final vision. But nobody gets to use the thing until it's all done. For example, if I was going to build a house for you, that's the way I would do it. I would figure out where the house is going to go. We would say, okay, there are lots of different things that need to happen before I can give you that house and before you can move in. I need to make sure the basement has been poured. I need to make sure the walls have been put up. The electrical has been installed. The plumbing has been installed. The drywall, the painting, all the fixtures. Everything has to be ready and then you can move in. So it might take me 12 months or 18 months before the house is ready to be delivered to you. Now, on the other hand, if I did things in an agile way of working, maybe I would be able to make one room of the house first and you can move in and live in that room. And then we can start building the rest of the house around you. That would be the way we can do one room at a time and keep giving you 1 room, then 2 rooms, then 3 rooms, then 4 rooms, and eventually you'll have the whole house. That doesn't work very well in a house, but in services and IT, you can do that oftentimes. So when you're building a service in IT, you want to think about that and how you can progress iteratively with feedback. This means we're going to organize the work into smaller, more manageable sections. If I'm going to make an iPhone app, for instance, it may have just one function when I release it. And then I'll add the second function, and then the third function. I can do this sequentially or simultaneously. I can make these in manageable, smaller chunks of code, and then as I put something out, I can get feedback from my audience that, hey, we don't like this, we want more of this. And that gives me some tangible results to figure out, am I hitting the bullseye, or do I need to pivot to something else? Also, it's better because I get timely feedback. If I put out one feature, it may have only taken me a month or 2 to build. And you could tell me, I really don't like that feature because it needs this other thing. Whereas if I waited an entire year to deliver something that had 20 features, you then look at it and go, no, don't like it, and we have another year's worth of work. So the idea here is to use smaller pieces and build upon them for future improvements. Now, this feedback loop is critical inside of this because as I'm delivering these small modular chunks, I'm getting feedback from my end users or from my stakeholders. And this feedback loop is a situation where part of this output is now activity that's going to be used for a new input. So as I gave you a piece of software, you can say, I like the software, but the fact that it has a blue icon is bad. I want it to have a red icon. That now becomes input that goes back into the second version that is now going to come out with a red icon. A good example of this is feedback surveys that you get from customer support. If I'm running a help desk or a service desk, after I'm done with the call, I'm going to get feedback from the user I helped that says, were you satisfied or not? And if not, why not? I can then use that to build into the process other things that are going to help improve those scores. Now, because we're doing things in iterative manner and we're doing things in these smaller chunks and getting that feedback, we're going to be able to have these initiatives and all the components that make it up broken down into these smaller chunks. And these are going to be continually reevaluated to reflect changes in our circumstances. Maybe the requirements are going to change. Maybe the marketplace has shifted. If you went back 5 or 10 years, the deal of a day sites like Groupon were huge. Everyone was making them. And so everybody would just put them out really quick and see what happened. But if you tried to make a deal of the day site today, you're probably not going to do very well with it. So instead, if you put that out and saw there was no marketplace intake of it, nobody wanted that service, you could say, what out of this can I use and make into my next service? Now, because we're trying to progress iteratively, we're going to have all of these things broken down into smaller chunks of code like we've talked about. So these might be smaller systems or processes or services. Now, we're going to take our initiative and break it down into these different components. And throughout each of these iterations, as we're building them, we're going to be getting feedback. Now, as we get that feedback, we're going to continually reevaluate what we've put out. And based on that feedback, we're going to reflect changes into our next version of the products. Now, as we're seeking out all that feedback, we need to make sure we don't just collect it and do nothing with it. We actually want to use that feedback. We want to use it before, during, and after building each of these iterations of the service. And so as we keep using these feedback loops between all of these participants, it helps us understand where the work is coming from, where the outputs from the service are going, and how it affects the ultimate consumer and their affected outcomes. By understanding all of that, we're getting more feedback, which allows us to build better. This is all about doing things in an agile way because it's quicker to market. So some of the key takeaways I want you to have from this lesson on progressing iteratively and with feedback is that as you're going through, you're going to do things by comprehending the whole, but doing small pieces towards that end goal. So if I think about this again like a house, I need to think about what the whole house will look like, but right now I'm focused on building one room, right? And that would be the way that we can build one room and then the second room and then the third room. If you do that in the software or a service realm, we're building these components, putting them together to give us the complete service. When we think about this also, remember that your ecosystem is constantly changing, so feedback becomes essential. As I'm putting out something to the market, I may find out from my consumers they don't care about that feature. They don't care about that service, and so we need to pivot and do something different. The other thing is, I want you to remember that fast does not mean incomplete. Even though I'm only giving you one chunk or one feature, that feature should be complete. And it can do the whole function that it needs to in and of itself. But then the next iteration might be able to add a second feature or a third feature. That doesn't mean that with the one feature it was incomplete. It was a complete and ready product for version 1. And now version 2 has 2 functions and version 3 has 3 functions. And you keep adding as you go. Remember, the whole concept here is that we can get things out to market faster, we can get feedback, and then incorporate that into our future versions. Collaborate and promote visibility. This is our 4th guiding principle. Now, when we talk about this, it's all about collaborating across our staff and even with our consumers and our customers. When we have an initiative that involves the right people in the correct roles, we get a lot of benefit from better buy-in, more relevance, and increased likelihood of long-term success. Collaboration is all about working together. We need to share information. We need to build trust. We need to build understanding. We need to understand that there's real accomplishment that can happen when we work across the staff and get out of our own little pigeonholed silos. For example, if I'm building a new service and I want to build it all completely in the IT realm, but it's going to affect the marketing team, that is not going to have good long-term success. Instead, I should get people from the marketing team to work with us as we build this service for them, because that way we understand better what their roles are and their intended outcomes. We understand the way they're going to work with this service, right? And so by collaborating across, we're going to get a better product. The other part of this is it's going to increase visibility. They're going to understand where we are in the development. And so it's going to make them happier and be able to understand exactly where we are and if we're hitting our milestones and if we're going to get the product out in time to do what they need it. When we look at this, there are people and perspectives for successful collaboration across all of your stakeholder groups. You alone do not have the right answers, but when you work with everybody together, we do come up with better solutions. This means that the service provider needs to work with their customers. The developers need to work with operations. The suppliers need to work with the organization. All of these collaborations are going to give us a better end product. Now, if we don't have transparency and we don't give good visibility, what ends up happening? Well, we start getting this impression that work is not a priority. For example, the people in marketing that I'm building this site for don't necessarily know that I've got 50 other tasks that I'm working. They're only tracking the one, and they think theirs is the most important. And they might only want a small improvement to their site. Maybe they want to change some font colors. Well, is changing the font colors more important than fixing something that has been down and is costing us money? Well, no, but they don't know that because you're not being transparent with them. So by going through and showing them and saying, hey, I understand this is your priority, but it's not the highest priority right now because we have other more urgent tasks that are being dealt with. You got to be transparent this way. Show people where your outages are. Show them what you're working on and give them an idea of when you're going to get to their particular problem. If you have an insufficient amount of visibility, your work is going to lead to poor decision making because somebody above you may not understand what all the things are that you're working on, right? And your boss comes in and says, hey, the marketing director just came and complained that the font is blue, but it should be green. I need you to change that right now. Drop everything you're doing. And he might not even understand that you're currently working on a server outage that's preventing your company from being able to process your credit card payments. And that's costing you, say, $100,000 a day. That would be more important to work on than the green to blue font change, right? So this is the kind of idea of things you need to think about, is making sure that everyone up and down and across has visibility into what the organization is working on. This helps make sure everybody understands the flow of work. They can identify the bottlenecks and the excess capacity that exists, and we can uncover waste to make sure that we're all working much more efficiently. If you work in an agile development area, you may have something like a Kanban board, which shows everything that people are working on at that time. What work is in progress, what work needs to be worked on, and what work was already completed. That's a great way to increase visibility. Another agile technique that I've seen used is what's known as an information radiator. This is a big board in a central area that shows the progress map of what's being worked on, the risks that we've identified, the issues that have come up, and other important information. This is being fully transparent and showing everybody what you have and what you're working on. This is the ultimate in visibility and collaboration. So as we think about the key takeaways here from collaboration and visibility, I want you to think about this. Collaboration does not mean consensus. Now, what do I mean by that statement? When it comes down to it, I want you to collaborate. I want you to work as a team. But at the end of the day, somebody is in charge of this project. Somebody is in charge of this service. And that person gets to make the decisions. They should take in the input from everybody's suggestions, but they're ultimately going to be the ones making the decision. And that's why collaboration, communication, and visibility is important, because that decision maker is going to decide which trajectory and how we're going to build that service is going to be done. Next, I also want you to remember that communicating is important, and you have to communicate in a way that the audience can hear. If I'm working with marketing folks, I'm not going to talk to them about bits and bytes and all the technical details of the service. Instead, we're going to talk about outputs and outcomes. What do they hope to get from the service? What are they going to put in, and what are they expecting to get out? Talk to them in a way they can hear and understand. And finally, remember that decisions can only be made on the visible parts of the project. So if you don't have good visibility and they don't understand all of your pain points, all of your issues, and all of your risks, then leadership can't make the right decisions. That's part of this collaboration and visibility too, making sure the information is getting up to the right people at the right level to make the right decisions. Think and work holistically. This is our fifth guiding principle. This principle says that we should take a holistic approach to service management, and this requires us to have an understanding of all of the parts of the organization and how they work together in an integrated way. Think about this like your car. Your car, you get in and you drive, and your output of that, or your outcome of that, is that it gets you from point A to point B. But that car is a complex piece of machinery. There are lots of different systems, from the engines to the brakes to the transmissions to the air conditioning, that all have to work together to make that system work. Now, if you understand it from end to end, That's understanding it holistically. You have to understand everything and how it works together. Now, as somebody who drives a car, do I really need to know every single piece of that car? No. I need to know the holistic approach to it, and that way I can understand its simplicity of if I put the key in and I turn it, that's going to turn on the engine and allow me to drive to my destination. Now, as we look at our IT services and IT service management, we have to make sure that we're addressing all 4 dimensions, because this will make sure that we're thinking of things in a holistic manner. I'm going to consider my organizations and people, the information and technology, the partners and suppliers, and the value streams and processes. If I use those 4 dimensions of IT service management, those 4 perspectives, I'm going to make sure that I have a good holistic overview of how that service works. And then if I want to get a little bit more tactical with it, I can go and look at the service value system for that particular service. I'm going to look at the input, the demand and the opportunity, as it goes through the middle of the service value chain, and it goes through the governance and the continual improvement and the guiding principles, and then out the other side as the desired outcome or value. Again, by using these 2 frameworks, the 4 dimensions and that service value system, I really can understand things in a much more holistic way. Now, as I look at things from a holistic area, I want you to remember that systems are complex, and you have to recognize that these systems are complex. There's a lot of inputs and there's a lot of outputs. Things are rarely as simple as steps 1, 2, and 3. Generally, there's steps 1, 2, and 3, but they're impacted by another series of processes or steps that are outside of itself. If I'm running something like a web server, well, I'm going to have the website and the code for that, but it also has an underlying operating system, and an underlying server, and an underlying network, and underlying connectivity, and all of those are interrelated. If I understand the complexity of the system, I can then understand the simplicity of the system on the other side of it. And I'll explain that in a little bit here as well. Another key to working holistically is to collaborate. And we talked about collaboration in the 4th guiding principle. Collaboration really is the key to thinking and working holistically. If I work in IT, I might understand all of the bits and the bytes and the servers and the connectivity. But I might not understand what the larger business is looking for to get out of this service. So as I look at this service, I want to make sure I'm collaborating with the people who are going to be selling the service, the people who are going to be marketing the service, the people who are going to be supporting the service. And if we all look at it from all of our different perspectives, we can make sure we're looking at this thing in a holistic and integrated way. Whenever possible, we want to look for patterns of interaction between our different system elements. What are the things that are going to give inputs or outputs from the system and affect the way it performs? To make something truly simple, you have to understand all of its complexity. And then, once you understand the complexity, you can proceed to bringing it back up to a simple representation. For example, recently I was working with an organization and we were trying to better understand the way their cybersecurity posture was set up. Their cybersecurity posture had dozens and dozens of different systems, all working together to hopefully give them a good cybersecurity posture. Now, as we wanted to figure out what the complexity was and to simplify it, we had to go through and bring in people from all of the different programs that were being run across the security stack. And as we did that, we started figuring out, okay, this program does functions 1, 2, and 3. This other one does functions 4 and 5. This other program does functions 1, 4, 5, and 6. And we had to start laying out in deep complexity each of the interactions between all of these different systems, so we can then look simply as we step back and said, okay, we are fully covering this service from a security perspective holistically. Again, if you want to make something simple, you have to first understand the complexity of it. Then you can go through and try to minimize as much of the complexity and represent it as a simple solution at the end. Finally, when you're working holistically, you also may want to consider the use of automation, because automation can help us to facilitate working holistically across our staff. If we consider the example of an incident management system, your service desk is probably going to be the entry point for any incidents that are reported to the organization. They're your first line help desk, and as people call in with their problems, they're going to log those, categorize those, and tag those. But at that point, the system can then use automation to make sure those get put into the right department for them to be able to work it. For example, if you had a hard drive that failed, you're going to call the help desk, they're going to put in the ticket, and it's going to get routed over to the people who support hardware. If you're having trouble accessing a certain website, that might get routed to a different team. And it's going to be working across the entire organization that way, but this IT service, this service of incident management, is going to be something that's going to be holistic across the staff, and we're going to use automation to help support that. Keep it simple and practical. This is our sixth guiding principle. You may have heard the acronym KISS or KISS. Keep it simple, stupid. Well, that's really what we're talking about here. When we're talking about keeping it simple, I want you to think with the end in mind. We call this outcome-based thinking. By starting with what the outcome is, you can then back your way into all of the different steps you're going to need to achieve to be able to get from the input to the outcome you desire. So we want to use outcome-based thinking to produce practical solutions which are going to deliver valuable outcomes while using the minimum number of steps. Now, to do this, we have to go back to our fifth guiding principle, though, and think of things with a holistic view of the organization's work in mind. If I don't understand end-to-end how the organization functions, I can't get a simple and practical process that's going to be working for our services. Now, when I first start creating a process or a service, I want to start with an uncomplicated approach. We can always add more to it later, but we want to start out with the fewest amount of steps, because that means that's less steps that can break, and it's less development that we have to put up in the front side of it to see if it's actually going to work for us. Now, as we go through and we develop our approach, I want you to build it for the most common scenarios first. You don't want to try to produce a solution for every single exception. For example, let's say that you're running the service desk at your organization. You are running the entire incident management front end for that company. As people make a phone call in and they tell you about their problems, you're going to see if it matches one of three categories. The first category might be something like a password reset. The second one might be that their computer doesn't boot up. And the third one might be that their computer doesn't have network access. You might create procedures for each of those three most common situations. But not every call is going to be one of those three. You might have some that fall into the fourth category, meaning something else. Well, I don't want you to produce a solution for every single something else. Instead, just create this fourth bucket that says, if somebody's calling for one of these other things, then it goes into the manual process. And that's when we're going to have a human take control and do something about it. Whereas those first three, we might end up getting it simple, making sure it's practical, and then automating that solution. Now, by doing this, we can be mindful of how we're going to complete the objectives and the outcomes that we desire. This is the whole benefit of keeping it simple. By starting easy, you can get quick wins, you can ensure value, and the simplicity is really the ultimate sophistication. By doing fewer things, you can do them really well and really fast. And for that small amount of things that doesn't fit into the major three categories, you can then focus your team's dedicated time to those by using skilled labor. This is going to respect the time of the people involved. For example, going back to password resets, when I was running a large service desk for an organization of 10 to 15,000 users, about 90% of our phone calls was because people needed to reset their password. So when we created an automated way to do that and we simplified that process, it was better for them, it gave them more value, it got them back to work quicker, and more importantly, it freed up 90% of my labor because they weren't taking phone calls from people trying to reset their password. Instead, I could take those people and dedicate them to the other problems, the hard problems that needed their assistance. So, by keeping it simple, it makes things easier to understand, more likely to be adopted, and it really is the best route to achieving those quick wins and getting people to adopt what you're doing. Optimize and automate. This is our seventh and final guiding principle. And we have this one as our seventh one because it is really one of the ones you want to do last, because you're going to implement a lot of the other guiding principles and then optimize and automate. But what does optimize mean? Well, it means to make something as effective and useful as it makes sense to do. Before an activity can be effectively automated, you first want to make sure you're optimizing it to whatever degree is possible and reasonable. By doing this, you're going to make sure that you're not just doing things automatically and quicker, but you're doing them the best way, and then you can make them automated and quicker. And so to do this, we really want to understand and agree to the context for the optimization. By figuring out what that process is, by keeping it simple using our sixth principle, we then can go through and assess the current state to understand where it can be improved. That sounds familiar. That was one of our earlier guiding principles, right? Starting where you are. And then we want to focus on simplification, again, keeping it simple, and the value that's involved to agree to our future state. That might be something like focusing on value. Then we want to ensure that we optimize it for the appropriate level of stakeholder engagement and commitment. So that goes back to collaborating with other people. Then once we do that, we're going to execute all of those improvements in an iterative way, progressing iteratively, using metrics and other feedback to check our progress and stay on track to adjust as needed. And once all of that's done, we're going to continually monitor it to identify any opportunities to improve our work methods. You can see that by optimizing things, we really are pulling in areas from all of the other guiding principles. Now, once we've optimized it and we have the best process in the least amount of steps that's ready to be automated, we're going to move into automation. Now, automation is the use of technology to perform a step or a series of steps correctly and consistently with limited or no human intervention. By automating, we can automate frequent and repetitive tasks to help our organizations scale up and free up those human resources to be used for more complex decision making. In the last lesson, I was talking about the incident management desk. You may automate the first 3 categories or something like password resets. That frees up people to be able to do more of the harder, complex decision-making and problem-solving techniques. In my company, we did this exact same thing with our voucher fulfillment system. At first, it was a manual method. You would order a voucher, I would then order it from the company, I would turn around and take that, package it up in an email, and send it back to you. Over time, we started getting a lot of people who were buying vouchers, and so it was eating up a lot of my time as a person. And then it started eating up a lot of my assistant's time when she started doing it. And so what we ended up doing was we ended up automating that system. Now, when you go to our website and you buy a voucher, there is no human involvement. It's going to go through, pull the next available voucher from our inventory, put it in an email, give you the directions, email it back to you, and all of that happens in a matter of seconds or minutes. The simplest form of automation is always going to involve standardizing and streamlining all of these manual tasks to allow decisions to be made automatically. In our case, that's exactly what happened. All the only decision it needs to do is figure out, did you order an Itil 4 voucher, an Itil 3 voucher, a Prince 2 voucher? Based on that, it pulls the right one and sends it back to you. It's all automated. That's the beauty of it, because now I was able to free up those hours of human labor to go do other more important things, like make study guides for you, or make new slides, or new videos, or do video editing, or answer student questions. All of that is being able to be done because we automated a simple process. So when you think about this, how are you going to apply this principle? Well, first, you're going to simplify and optimize before you ever automate. You don't want to take something that has 1,000 steps and automate it, because now it's just doing that bad process faster. That's still costing you time and it's still costing you money. Instead, we want to take that process, get it down to the simplest steps, and then automate it, because that's going to save you the most time and the most money. Next, I also want you to look for anything that's done manually and repetitively. If you, for instance, get an email every day for an email newsletter, and you always have to take it and drag it to your trash can, that takes up maybe 2 or 3 seconds of your time. But you can apply an automated filter that anytime that email comes in, it automatically moves it to your trash can. Or you can go and unsubscribe, right? But you get the idea. Anything that you see yourself doing day in and day out, there's probably a computer program that can be done to optimize it and automate it so you don't have to do it. Second, I want you to always define your metrics. What does good look like? If we're talking about my voucher fulfillment system, our metric is that you're going to get your voucher within 5 minutes of ordering. And that's pretty generous. Usually it takes about 60 seconds. Again, define your metrics so you can then look at your systems and see if they've been optimized and automated properly to meet the metrics you have. Also, you want to make sure you're using the other guiding principles when you apply this one. As I said, we're going to use a lot of these other principles. We're going to think and work holistically, because if we look at the whole system as a whole, we can figure out where the optimizations can best be taken. We're also going to look at starting where you are, because we need to know where we are to figure out how we can get to the next level. We also want to keep it simple and practical, because we want to eliminate steps that aren't needed or aren't practical. Then we want to build on that by progressing iteratively and with feedback. And finally, we always have a focus on value. We always want to make sure that what we're doing is for a reason. We're doing this process to give more value to our consumers or to our organization or to both. So that was our 7 guiding principles. And they all kind of get summed up here at the end with optimize and automate, because we really do dig into all of those principles as we work through optimizing and automating our systems. Welcome to this section of the course on the service value chain. In this section of the course, we're going to be focusing on the 5th major objective for the exam. This states that you have to be able to understand the activities of the service value chain and how they interconnect. Underneath this objective, there are two sub-objectives. It's to describe the interconnected nature of the service value chain and how this supports value streams, and to describe the purpose of each of the value stream activities. That includes plan, improve, engage, design and transition, obtain and build, and delivery and support. So back when we talked about the service value system, we had one inside block that showed us the service value chain. Well, in this section of the course, we're going to break that block open and look at all of those different pieces. As you can see here, we have things like engage, plan, improve, design and transition, obtain and build, deliver and support, and products and services. And all of those are going to work together as part of this service value chain. Now, there's a couple of important things to know when we look at a diagram like this. This is not shown to introduce a linear sequence of events. If you happen to be familiar with Itil version 3 or the older version of Itil, we had what we called the service lifecycle, and it was a sequence of actions in a linear format. So we would start with a strategy, and then move to design, and then move to transition, and then move to operations, and then we would move to continual service improvement, and we worked through those 5 life cycles. Here in Itil 4, we don't do that anymore. This is not a linear sequence. Instead, we normally are going to start with engage, but we don't always have to. And based on that, we're then going to touch into other areas of that interior cube. And as we look at that central cube with the activities in there, we have 3 major groups. We have design and transition, obtain and build, and deliver and support. These are what I refer to as the central activities inside the service value chain. And these can interact in any order between each other and with the other activities as well. Another important thing to note is this overlap that exists between improve and the other areas of the service value chain. You'll notice that improve is shown in the lower half of this diagram, and there's this overlap of this purple band that goes from improve to improve and engage. You have improve to the activities inside the central cube, such as the deliver and support, the design and transition, or the obtain and build. We have improve and the products and services. All of these are here to show us that feedback loop that exists between each part of the service value chain as it moves through the improvement cycle and the continual service improvement. Now, you also need to understand and manage the perceived value of this service value chain, because it's going to drive the demand for the next order, the next product, the next service, or the next iteration of your service relationship. Now, the reason why we call this a service value chain is because all these actions are linked together. So there's a lot of interactions that occur between these different practices. This service value chain activities are going to represent all of the different steps that the organization is going to take in the creation or co-creation of value. Each activity is going to contribute to the value chain by transforming the specific inputs into desired outputs. And so as we take things from demand and opportunity, it goes through that service value chain, getting additional value added and coming out the other side as the value and the desired outcome that we want for our services. That's the way that we're going to be looking at all of this. And so to convert these inputs into outputs, these value chain activities are going to use different combinations of the 34 Itil practices that we're going to discuss throughout the remainder of this course. Each activity can draw upon internal or third-party resources. They can look at different processes, different skills and competencies from one or more of these 34 practices. They don't have to be done individually. They can be combined together too. And that's the whole idea here as we start getting these interrelationships through the service value chain activities. All of the incoming and outgoing interactions with all of the different parties that are external to your service provider are all performed through the engage value chain activity. That's why it's one of those first ones that normally occurs. Anytime you want a new resource, that's going to be obtained through the obtain and build activity. Anytime you want to plan something, any planning is going to occur through the plan activity. When you're trying to improve things, that's going to happen through the improve activity. You're kind of getting the idea here, right? All of the different things that we do are going to be binned into one or more of these different buckets. As we create and modify and deliver and maintain and support a component, a product, or a service, all of that's going to happen inside that central cube between design and transition, obtain and build, and delivery and support. As we look at our products and services, our demand and our value, these are not considered value chain activities, right? Those go back to our service value system. Those are our inputs and our outputs. So the inside is what we're really looking at here. That's engage, plan, improve, obtain, build, delivery and support, and design and transition. As we look at those, that is what we're going to be focusing on in this section of the course, and we're going to dive into each one of those in their own separate lecture as we move forward. Plan. The first value chain activity we're going to discuss in this section is known as plan. The purpose of the plan value chain activity is to ensure a shared understanding of the vision, the current status, and the improvement direction for all 4 dimensions of the IT service management and all of our products and services across the organization. This is your executive vision. It's where we want to be, and then the plans to get us there. As we look at the inputs to the plan process, we're going to be looking at policies, requirements, and constraints that are provided by the organization's governance body. We're also going to be looking at consolidating all of the demands and opportunities that are being sent to us from the engage process that we're going to be talking about in a few minutes. We're also going to be looking at all of the value chain performance information, the improvement initiatives, and the plans that are provided from the improve process. We're also going to be looking at improvement status reports from the improve process. We're going to be looking at knowledge and information about our new and changed products and services from our design and transition or our obtain and build processes. We're going to take that knowledge and information about third-party service components as well, coming in from the engage process. All of this is things that are going to go into our planning so we can figure out how we can best get our services to where we want them to be. If you're familiar with the old Itil ways, it used to be known as strategy. A lot of that is now part of this plan process. Now, all of that is the inputs. What comes out of the plan process? Well, we're going to be looking at 3 levels of plans. We have strategic plans, which are those big organizational plans. We have tactical plans, and we have operational plans. And this is kind of big, middle, and small as we get down into the weeds. We also have portfolio decisions that are going to be made, so we can decide what services are we going to bring online so that we can pass those to design and transition so they can actually design and build those services and figure out how to make them a reality. When we talk about plan, we're talking about the big overarching way of thinking about how we're going to get somewhere. We also want to think about our architectures and our policies, and those are things that we're going to output and give to design and transition. Now, what do I mean by architectures and policies? Well, maybe part of our plan means that we're going to use cloud architectures. That means that design and transition should no longer be trying to build server farms for us to use. Instead, they should be looking at getting things on the Amazon Web Services, or Microsoft Azure, or Google Cloud. That would be an architecture decision that's going to come out of plans and be given to design and transition. As we want to give things back to the improve process, we want to tell them, based on our planning, we think these are things that can be improved. These are improvement opportunities. And so we'll pass that back to the improve process as well. Another thing we're going to give to the engage process is our product and our service portfolio. As an organization, we're going to create the roadmap of what we want to build and what we want to get over the next, say, 3 or 5 years. Once we have that plan in place, we give that to engage, and they're going to go out and engage with customers, consumers, as well as service providers to figure out how we can build what we want to get from this plan. And that engagement is going to happen by going out and making contracts or making connections to get what we need. Which brings us to the last thing. Engagement also is going to go out as an output from our plans and get the contracts and the agreements in place so that we can actually give that into the design and transition and then to the build team so they can build what it is we're envisioning. That's the idea. When you hear about plans inside the service value chain, I want you to think about the fact that we're thinking about big plans. We're talking about roadmaps. For example, in my company, we have a roadmap that says over the next 3 years, these are the different certification programs that we're going to support and create videos and exams for. If it's not on that roadmap, we're not going to put effort towards it because that is our plan. That is what we're going to be going towards. That is our big, overarching strategic vision. Now, from that strategic vision, we have a tactical plan that says in the next year, we're going to do these 3 certifications maybe. And then we have operational plans of how we're going to build one of those individual courses. And so it goes from the big plan to a medium-sized plan down to the very detailed operational plan. That's the idea here when we talk about plans inside the service value chain.